In the middle of the grand hall, there was a young guy sitting on an expensive throne, wearing expensive armor and looking very confident. His nickname was X, and he was so rich that he could afford anything he wanted. From the most expensive equipment that cost as much as a sports car in real life, to buying potions that cost more than a college education in real life. And all for the sake of self-assertion and the desire to become a real king of players. At first everything went well, and he with the help of his loyal team achieved success and held the throne of king for more than 2 years. But everything changed in an instant. And if someone were to ask him now about his days in Lin Online, he would want to punch that person. Because now he had to work hard every day to keep up with all the orders. 2 years ago, his team had rebelled against him, wanting to take away his title as the strongest monarch. And even though it's been over 2 years now, his resentment hasn't gone anywhere. Even more, it probably won't go away even decades later. The mere memory of it all made him angry, and he clutched the rag he had been wiping the stove with. And all because the game that had been his life and his favorite place to play had simply disappeared in an instant, just like everything he had achieved during his time playing in it. And it was his former team that made him leave that game. Even now, standing over the stove and dusting himself off, after remembering what had happened then, his hand involuntarily clenched with anger all over again. The people he had started out playing with, the people he trusted the most, had stabbed him in the back in a sneaky way. The reason, as it often is, was only one, and it was money. After all, there was no one who wasn't jealous of his enormous income. And the unsuspecting monarch became the perfect target for betrayal. All his friends in the game chose money over him. And after all, he was the strongest monarch in the history of this Lin Online game. But they still really wanted to get him out of their way and prepared a whole plan for this. And they all worked quickly and cleanly, because then he realized everything only after he died in the game. And lost all his precious items. The system notified him that he would be revived and moved to the nearest city, where he could start the game over again. Then he dearly learned one important lesson: never trust anyone. The only one he could count on and rely on was himself. With a trembling hand he could barely let go of the mouse he was so used to. Then he promised himself that he would eat it all himself and regain the top spot again. But as it turned out, starting all over again was not an easy task, and after several failed attempts he realized that he would never succeed. After all, his current level does not correspond to his goal. In addition, during the quiet time spent as a monarch, his fingers had aged and weakened, and now fast control of the character was not possible for him. Plus the interference from his old friends who had established themselves as monarchs made things even worse. He could no longer enjoy the game at all. It was time to stop and give up. Our hero had to leave his once favorite game. He sold his account and used the money he earned to open his current store, where he was now forced to work every day in the sweat of his brow. Well, that was how he made his living, but now looking back he thought that it would have been better if he hadn't handed out his income from account to them so stupidly. But now it was just empty regrets, and there was nothing more he could do about it. Now all he had to do was cook the chicken and pass the finished orders to the customers. After the day was over, he exhaled in relief and stretched his strained back, praising himself for a good job. He could finally relax and opened the refrigerator to grab a can of soda. Taking it, he sat down at one of the tables in the middle of his store and just sat there for a few minutes, contemplating his plight. But then he got tired of just sitting there, so he decided to turn on the TV and watch the news. But instead of the boring evening news, there were two anchors discussing the release of a new game. They were saying that starting tomorrow, Fate, which everyone had been so eagerly waiting for, will begin official service. And now finally everyone who has been waiting so eagerly for its release will be able to play it. Our hero listened incredulously and sipped his soda. What was it to him that some new game came out? He had enough to do here. He leisurely finished his soda and was about to turn off the TV, thinking that if he was 5 years younger, he would have tried his hand at this game right after its release. But suddenly, the news said that famous players were also showing notable interest before the opening of Fate. Especially prominent among them was the War Machine Guild from Lin Online, who were our protagonist's team. Upon hearing the name of their guild, he immediately tensed up. The hosts were discussing their interview in which the leaders of this guild had very openly expressed their determination regarding this new game. Now the evening immediately stopped being so boring. The hosts even called out their nicknames, Kaimus, Diesel, and Sorceress. Although most people already knew them. All of them were determined to take leadership positions in Fate, just like in Lin Online. Hearing their names, our hero gritted his teeth in anger. At first he thought that if it were up to him, he would immediately start playing this game and see if it was really his destiny to get revenge or not. But then after cooling down a bit, he sadly bowed his head realizing that none of this would work. After all, it's been over 2 years since he stopped playing games. And he also has to run his business. As he searched for excuses why he couldn't start playing again, the news anchors continued to praise the game, which they said had endless content and tons of players. But on top of all this there was another interesting detail: in order to enter this game you needed a special device, a capsule diver. One of the presenters explained that capsule divers can be purchased on the Fate website. And if anyone has any difficulties in using the website, they can contact Fate user support and they will be happy to provide all the help they can. To find out more, our hero immediately started searching the internet for information about this device. As it turned out, it was an advanced virtual reality device that allowed you to fully immerse yourself in the world of the game. Our protagonist had heard about virtual reality before, but before that everything, including the virtual world itself and especially the control in it, was cramped and unnatural. But the developers of the device convinced that now there is a new era, when players will control their characters with the help of brainwaves and will be able to fully into the beautiful world. Such information surprised our hero. After all, it changed everything and meant that manual control would not be used, and now even he with his weak and slow fingers would be able to compete with the other players on equal terms. This was his chance to prevail over Fate, and he clutched the empty soda can in his hand with a confident smile, mentally telling his future opponents to run while they had the chance. After all, he was going to remind them all again the difference between a true monarch and a bunch of trash. In such an elevated mood, he returned to his apartment and decided to order the device immediately. But what was his disappointment when he discovered that all of these outrageously expensive consoles were sold out on the first day. The console itself cost as much as 10 million won, plus additional services for a quick start cost several $100,000 more. Our hero wondered what he should do, as the next shipment of consoles was due in 4 weeks. He decided that first of all he needed to make a startup capital, and for this he would have to fry a lot of chicken to keep up with the others. Because each fried chicken would become a purchased item and level. Our hero hoped that he would succeed and he could get back to the top again. After a month of hard work, he finally bought himself a new generation console and all the preparations were completed. He finally started to get inside the console, which was huge and looked more like a CAT scanner than a game console. He lay down inside and put on his glasses. The moment had finally come. And first of all he needed to adapt perfectly in virtual reality. He thought it had been 2 years since he had played, but suddenly the space in front of him began to fill with blue pixels. And with a flash of bright blue light, he entered a new world and received the first notification: login completed. Immediately after that, an incredibly realistic blue sky with the sun was above him. His game character was lying peacefully in the middle of the lawn. It felt like he was coming to after a deep sleep and the sun was blinding him. Finally, he stood up, shielding himself from the sun's 2 bright rays. A beautiful forest with mountains and a waterfall appeared before his eyes. It was called the Forest of Beginning. It was all incredible for our hero, and he could not believe how real everything was around him. Further appeared another information window from the system that notified the player that the creation of the character is complete and asked to choose a nickname. Here our hero had no doubts. He was going to choose the same name as in the last game, X. The closest town to the Forest of Beginners was Narvel Castle, and its high walls stood out from the surrounding landscape. Inside the walls was a nice town with many stores, guilds and quests. It had everything a budding adventurer needed. The forest east of Narvel Castle was usually where many newbies would gather, hoping to gather their first resources from hunting and gathering. But this time, something was wrong and a group of beginners stared questioningly at the clearing in front of them. One guy among them commented in surprise that this dude was still doing this and asked the others how many hours it had been. He was wondering, is it really a person or could it be a bot? But another guy answered him that it seemed to him that it couldn't be a bot, since it was a brainwave recognition game. Meanwhile, in the clearing in front of them ran a lot of creatures called stupid tubi, which looked like a mixture of an egg and a chick. It turned out that it was our protagonist who was mercilessly exterminating the population of stupid tubi for several hours in a row in order to earn experience and raise his level. Thanks to his excellent concentration and effort, the game allowed him to regenerate his stamina. It was one of the mechanics for accelerated pumping of beginners. Also, after a certain number of hits he could activate his passive skill swing, which he could use to kill all the stupid tubis in the clearing at once. Immediately after using it, he once again raised his level. After that, he summoned the information window to see his characteristics and attributes. By killing defenseless stupid tubis for hours on end, he was able to reach level 5. Also, he wasn't just doing this for the experience, but also to practice controlling his character. And now that the controls were familiar enough for him, he was starting to get used to his character's movements. Now he was ready to move on to the next location to hunt. He was a whole month behind the other top players and he needed to catch up with them as fast as possible. To do so, he had come far enough and another clearing spread out before him, flooded by the rays of the setting sun. At last he decided to stop here, for he had already come quite a long way from that forest of beginners. He immediately spotted a deer in the clearing and realized that he seemed to have come far enough, and this was exactly what he needed. X drew his sword and was about to hunt all the monsters he could find in this forest. First to go was that poor deer, which he killed with one precise swing, gaining much more experience than he had gotten for stupid tubi. But immediately after killing the deer, he saw a notification that the hunger bar was below 10%. Moreover, his character's movements immediately slowed down and his stamina regeneration stopped. He exhaled tiredly. Such game mechanics seemed annoying to him. What genius had come up with the idea of adding a hunger system to the game? Our hero hadn't expected to start feeling hungry so early in the game. Now he will have to distract himself from advancing his character and constantly looking for food. But even though he was basically in the middle of a place like Mount Jumgang, so he could try to find something edible here. He decided to check his inventory and there were a few warm loaves of bread in there before he set off. So he had food for the first time. He took out the warm bread and was about to eat it. But suddenly something flew near him with lightning speed and knocked the bread out of his hands. The bread fell on the grass. However, as soon as our hero looked at the place where it should have fallen, it was no longer there. Something incomprehensible was happening. How could the thief be so quick and brazen? Our hero looked at him judgmentally and asked him how he dared. But the stranger did not pay any attention to him and began to eat the bread greedily. While he was enjoying his food and exclaiming how delicious it was, X did not give up trying to find out who he was. And even thought how elaborate the game was that it even had beggars like him. An information window appeared above the stranger, but even it said that this was an unknown man. However, the appearance of the window above him meant that this man was not a user, but an NPC. Things were very strange then, because NPCs never do anything for nothing, and if they go or do something, there must be a reason for it. Our hero decided to take advantage of this and see what would happen. He assumed the man was hungry and offered him another bread if he wanted it. His face lit up with happiness, he couldn't believe his luck. X convinced him that he could eat as much as he wanted. The man walked over to him and took another bread, telling him that it had been over 300 years since he had eaten the way he did now. X incredulously interrogated 300 years. The man replied that no matter how far he would be forced to go on his journey, he could not let this valuable item be wasted. He wanted to give our hero something for his kindness. X had already started dreaming about what good item he would receive as a reward. He hoped it would be some kind of weapon, equipment, treasure map or something like that. But the stranger just handed him a round blue candy-like pearl. And said it was all he had and he was asking to accept the gift. The information window said it was an unknown candy from an unknown man. Our hero was a little disappointed. He had exchanged 2 loaves of bread for 1 small ugly candy. At first glance it didn't look like an equal exchange. But he still had hoped that this candy had some hidden effects. So he decided to just try it out to experience the effects for himself. Even though common sense told him that it was probably a trap, he still wanted to try it. After all, even if it was, he was still a newbie with no way to die after losing all items and skills. As soon as he took the candy in his hands and looked at it closely, it glowed with a strange light. And cracked in the middle, filling all the space around with the infinity of space. Immediately the hero's eyes rolled back and he began to fall into a strange dream. As his unconscious body began to slowly settle on the grass in the middle of the clearing. The stranger expected this and stopped being more like a common beggar and said goodbye to the hero that he hoped to meet him again someday. Our hero found himself in the middle of a spacious hall at the table, which was full of various exquisite dishes. And a lot of fresh fruit. And the smell of it all was simply divine. In front of him was a royal banquet with candles, everything looked fresh and hot as if it had just been cooked. But as soon as he tried to touch the food, it was all just an illusion. Which seeped through his hand and was nothing more than a pretty picture with a pleasant smell. Behind his back was the same beggar and it seemed he was cooking something. Hearing a noise behind him, X turned around to find out what it was. He was surprised to find the very same man who was concentrating on cooking something. Our hero couldn't believe that that guy could be a chef. And it seemed that that man was waiting for someone. Suddenly the man spoke, saying that many times the sun has set and darkness has fallen. Many times the seasons changed, time passed and the man he was waiting for did not come. Suddenly he stopped talking and stopped cooking. And began to stare at our protagonist. So intently that it seemed he was waiting for him. That man's eyes shone brightly and the infinity of space was reflected in it again. Looking into his eyes, our hero immediately came to his senses from this strange dream. It was already night in the game and after such a dream he had a headache. He wondered if it was all just a dream or if everything was real. But all his doubts were dispelled the next moment when an information window appeared in front of him. Which told him that he had obtained the hidden class, Heavenly Gourmet. Our hero was surprised. Until this moment he didn't even know that hidden classes existed in this game. Along with the new class, our hero received a new passive skill, Heavenly Palate, which allowed him to discover and sense the hidden flavors of food. Heavenly Grind, which increased the chance of dropping high-quality items and ingredients. What an unexpected twist for our hero. Just a short while ago the hunger and food mechanics in the game annoyed him, and now with getting this class his entire gameplay will be tied to it. Since he received an active skill, Heavenly Cooking, which allowed him to create incredible dishes, which will surpass all ordinary dishes in their performance and effects. After reading everything that was shown by the information window, he realized that his class was similar to being a chef. But it didn't end there. In the next window with a class quest appeared in front of him. Now his main task in the game was to find out the truth about Gourmet King. This legend was spreading around the world of Fate, but no one could find out its origin and the truth about it. Only the hero who was a Heavenly Gourmet could do it. The system warned that no one could predict what the truth of this legend would bring, but it was certain that the history of the Fate world would be in the hands of our hero. But all these high-minded words didn't bother our hero. What really made him tense up was the difficulty and quest rewards that were listed as immeasurable. Did all this really mean that the entire history of the Fate world was in his hands? But our hero was not confused and decided that he should not be frightened by these big words, and right now he should have decided to reveal the truth behind that legend even if he had never heard about Gourmet King before. But before all that, he should have finally eaten, so he opened the inventory. There he selected rye bread, which immediately materialized in his hand. X looked at the bread and thought that due to his new skills, this bread must have some hidden flavor. So he tasted it without delay. He felt how soft and warm the bread was and he thought he could taste the feelings of care the farmer put into sowing the weed for it. There was also the notice that the viscosity that permeates the rye bread had been absorbed by his body. Now he didn't understand how the rye bread could be so delicious. All this besides the taste had another plus, for eating the bread his stamina attributes were increased by 30 points and his strength by 2 points. Now our hero could increase his different attributes just by eating a variety of food. He smiled as it gave him an undeniable advantage over the other players. And now he was sorry that he had said bad things about this class before, because it opened up limitless possibilities. But he had run out of bread, so he decided to walk around the neighborhood looking for something edible. On one of the trees at the edge of the forest he noticed bright red fruits. It was red berries, and thanks to the heavenly palate skill he had gotten a boost to his stamina and mana as soon as he tasted it. Red berries were very sweet tasting, but there was still one more thing that our hero needed to clarify. What would happen if he ate the same berry again? Would it give him bonuses? They still tasted great, but unfortunately he did not get any bonuses to the characteristics. So he had to look for new treats, and our hero turned his gaze to the creatures nearby. Poor big-horned deers did not suspect what awaited them next, but their fate was already decided, because they looked too tasty for our hero. And since eating the same things didn't work, it was time to change the menu, in which the main dish for the moment would be deer. X drew his sword and prepared his killer precision strike. The deer sensed the danger and started to run away, but it was already too late. And our hero ended all his suffering with one blow. He was wondering what the deer meat would taste like. Now he had the opportunity to find out, because from the killed deer he was able to collect several items, including meat. Thanks to his skills, this meat was of the highest quality and tasted softer and better than normal meat. However, because the meat was raw, it recovered 50% less satiety. He also got a soft deer skin. It was of the highest quality and was more valuable than regular deer skin. Selling this hide to merchants slightly increased their favorability to the player. In addition, equipment made from this hide was supposed to increase dexterity by 2 or 3 points. Our hero was pleased and surprised at the same time that after killing one deer he got 2 rare items at once. At this rate he will be able to earn a lot of real money just by hunting these deer. Well, it's time for the main course and our hero is going to hunt all the remaining deer. The poor guys started to run away, but unfortunately there was no chance to save them, and the hero advised them to wait right there and not to stretch the pleasure. Having finished with the deer hunt, our hero returned to Narvel Castle and visited the street of stores. He entered the store of the merchant Reuben, and when the latter asked him what had brought him here, X cheerfully replied that he had brought a dozen deerskins for sale. But the merchant cooled his ardor a bit, saying that he was sorry, but he wouldn't be able to offer him a good price on them due to the high level of supply of this item from the players. Our hero expected such a response, because any newcomer started with deer hunting, so he immediately placed 10 soft deer skins on the counter. The merchant's mood immediately changed, and he began to examine the goods with astonishment, not believing his eyes. He did not understand how someone could get so many such high-quality things. The merchant immediately asked if he had any more of these skins. After all, such high-quality goods were in high demand among the nobles, and he could offer a very good price for such skins. X was even a little surprised at the merchant's insistence. He replied that he could bring more skins, but first he would like to know how much the merchant would pay him for them. As soon as the question of price came up, Reuben's fervor immediately cooled down and he awkwardly asked how much our hero wanted to get for the skins. X's answer surprised him, because he wanted as much as 1 gold coin for each skin. This price was too high for the merchant. Our hero deliberately named a high price and planned to bargain and offer additional conditions in exchange for a better price, because negotiations and inner sense were very important in any business. So our hero offered the trader that if he agreed to such a price, then later he would bring him as many skins as he wanted, and to confirm his words he got 30 more soft deer skins. He had learned to haggle so skillfully for 2 years in his store selling fried chicken. Reuben couldn't resist and agreed to the offered price of 1 gold coin per piece. But, he also had a counter condition in exchange for such a high price. Next time our hero, if he had skins to sell, would have to come to this store to sell them. When they reached an agreement together, the merchant handed X 30 gold coins. After earning his first money in this game, our hero went for a walk around Narvel. As he walked down the street, he wondered what he should do next. He had the idea to exchange some gold coins for real money to pay for his living in the real world, and also he should have bought himself a good set of armor. But these gold coins were not enough for a good set of armor, and he needed to keep finding and getting good items and selling them. For that he decided to visit bison habitat at Narville Fields to hunt for ox. But there was another player there, and judging by his clothes he belonged to the priest class. He sadly watched the ox and wondered if it was even possible to reach the goal of being in the top 100 in 6 months. Especially when you don't have any connections, talent, or money. The other weak players seemed to have already given up and were no longer trying to raise their level. He wondered if maybe he should have given up too. But suddenly his attention was caught by a movement in front of him. It was our hero who was carrying out another merciless massacre for the local fauna in the process of extracting resources to sell. That priest couldn't believe his eyes. He did not understand what that guy was doing, destroying one after another. And in fact, how he, being in the armor of a novice, could so easily deal with so many ox at a time. But after seeing his skills and confident movements, he had an idea to use this talented player to raise his level. For that, all he needed to do was to form a team with him. This was his only chance to level up, and he wasn't going to miss it. So he jumped off a small cliff and headed towards our hero. But he killed the last ox and for some reason froze in place. And before the priest could run and shout to him, he began to leave the game. Above X appeared the corresponding system inscription, and he began to disappear from this game world. The poor priest was so close to his chance, but his shout, "Wait," seemed never to be heard. Such bad luck brought tears to the poor man's eyes. Our hero, on the other hand, returned to the real world in his apartment. He opened the lid of the console, which was like a sarcophagus, and leisurely climbed up for the first time in hours. Taking off his VR goggles, he remembered that, right before he exited the game, he heard someone calling him from behind. He instinctively turned around, wondering if it was all real or was it all his imagination. But there was no point in thinking about it for too long, and he dismissed all unnecessary thoughts and went to take a shower. Quickly ate a quick meal of convenience food, and filled the biogel container. Having made all the current and necessary preparations, our hero was ready to dive back into the game world. But before that he decided to read a little about the existing ranks in the game, because he heard that they are quite important and he wanted to know which of the ranks was the most accessible and easy to get. He turned on the Fate Tip radio on his phone and started listening, and he found out that you could get a rank by hunting 100 monsters of a higher level than players. But there was one thing: monsters killed in a team with someone did not count. Such conditions fully suited our hero, because for him to kill 100 monsters solo was an easy task. He with a confident smile put on and turned on the VR headset. Immersing himself in the world of the game, he thought that such a challenge would be an easy piece of cake for a former professional gamer like him. Booting into the game, our protagonist appeared in the same place. After materializing the sword, he first decided to calculate what he needed to do. The buffalo's level was over 20, while his level was still 18. In order to hunt a higher level monster, the most effective way was to be in a group. Standing in front of the big angry bull that was standing in a stance as if preparing to attack, X added to himself that all the previous requirements had nothing to do with him. Looking at the bull with steam coming out of his nose and looking at him with a furious look, he wondered with a smile what the bull tasted like. Since he had only caught 10 monsters during this time, he had no choice but to continue fighting. Jumping high into the air, he swung his sword with a cry of, "Let's eat," and lunged at the innocent bull. The next moment, he struck a blow that proved critical to the bull. As he watched the bull fall to pieces, he began to receive system notifications that he had earned experience as well as meat from the bull. Taking one of the pieces, he said with a happy face, "Itadakimasu." Then he took a bite and swallowed it. The system immediately reported that the juiciness of the bull meat was absorbed by the body. He also discovered a new hidden flavor called bull meat. But the most surprising thing was not that, but the fact that his strength increased by 10 points after taking a bite. When the protagonist read the message, he decided that his ability was not balanced at all. Even though it didn't help him fight directly, and he had to learn different techniques himself, it was still a small price to pay for such an incredible ability. Looking at his status window once again, he wondered what the game developers were thinking when they created such a hidden profession. Looking at his updated stats, he sighed and said that it would take some time to get 100 on everyone, as it wasn't as easy as he thought. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling out to him. He turned around and saw a yellow-haired guy who greeted him excitedly, introduced himself as Dallas, and that he was a priest. Then he added that he had been amazed when he saw him hunting yesterday. The protagonist was a little wary of this sudden acquaintance. Though it seemed a bit strange to him, he decided to take a chance and see what this guy had to offer him. He smiled back at the guy and thanked him for his praise, then asked him if he needed anything. He asked if he could add him as a friend, as he wanted to talk to him yesterday, but couldn't because he was out. The next moment, the protagonist received a message that Dallas had sent him a friend request. It was quite an interesting offer. Priests had weak attack power, making it difficult for them to level up on their own. As a result, very few players would become high-level priests. However, if one chose the right skills and pumped the right characteristics and raised the level, a priest of that level was the choice number one for the group, just because their support skills. Realizing that the one wanted him to help him level up, X decided that he had no reason to refuse since he was not losing anything by doing so. Smiling, he replied to the one that he agreed, adding that they could hunt together next time. Smiling happily, Dallas replied that he was glad, then informed him that he had some herb-gathering skills. He raised his staff to the top. The orb at the end immediately glowed with a bright green light, which in the next moment began to surround the protagonist, who was surprised by the unusual sensations spreading throughout his body. The system window immediately displayed a message that his inventory had been boosted, while the duration of the boost was 3 hours. Looking at his inventory and finding many empty cells in his inventory, X couldn't believe that he was able to get such a good boost so easily, which allowed him to kill a few more monsters before going to the city. However, the next moment he wondered if he really needed to go there. Turning to the priest who was about to leave, he asked if he could help him. He turned around and asked in surprise how he could help him. Taking out a bull horn from his inventory, the protagonist replied that there was nothing difficult in his request, because he only had to help him carry and collect the horns. Dallas was a bit puzzled by such a strange request. Let's go forward for a while. Standing next to the bull that had fallen to the ground after his sword strike, the protagonist told himself that it was the last one, and that he had already killed 100 in total. The next moment, the system sent a message saying that he had been promoted to the rank of Fearless Adventurer, which reduced his damage by 5% and also increased his damage output by 5% when fighting monsters of a higher level than him. After reading this information, he thought to himself that it wasn't that much. Looking at the priest who was surprised to see him collecting materials and putting them in his inventory, asking why he needed so many horns, he said to himself that even though it was not the priest's intended use, it was still quite useful. Stashing his sword in his inventory, he added that this situation was not harmful to him. Besides, it might even do him some good if he could connect with him. Heading into the city, and following his new comrade, Dallas also thought that he should not miss his chance, because to meet a player who would take a weak priest like him to his team again was very small. The kindness of the guy who had taken him in had impressed him a lot. And he was determined that when he became strong, he would also help the newcomers. Dallas was so much on fire about it that his blazing aura was felt even by X walking ahead of him, making him think that something felt a bit sneaky lurking behind him. After a while, they came to the town. As they were about to part ways, the protagonist thanked his new partner for helping him today. He replied that he was happy to help, adding that he should let him know if he needed any more help. Grabbing the doorknob leading into the store, X to himself that it was time to clear his inventory. As soon as he entered, he was immediately greeted by a shopkeeper he already knew, whose mood seemed a bit odd to the protagonist. As he approached the counter, he greeted Mr. Rubin back, saying that he had come to sell something. Seeing that the man did indeed look depressed, the protagonist asked the man what was wrong, adding that he noticed that he was not in his usual mood. The man lowered his head and clenched his hand into a fist and replied that nothing was wrong. However, after a second pause, he raised his head and looked at the protagonist and asked if he could spare him some time, as he had something important to tell him. Sitting at the table in the living room, X turned to the shopkeeper, who was sitting opposite in a depressed state, and asked him something he wanted to tell him. The latter replied that he was going to tell him a secret that only he would know. He then proceeded to tell him his problem, which began with the top management threatening him with unreasonable delivery terms, such as the rare deerskin he had bought last time. This time, however, the required item was beyond his capabilities. Besides, today was the last day, and if they couldn't fulfill the requirements on time, their store would most likely be closed. Looking at the protagonist, he added that as he should know, Narville was a town for beginners, and because of that, most adventurers would quickly move on to the hunting grounds. With tears in his eyes he said that because of this there were no players who would hunt the powerful Narville ox, and none of them had ever brought 100 ox horns at once. And he couldn't imagine where he could get so many horns in such a short period of time. The next moment, the protagonist rumbled to put down the ox horn, asking the man for the kind of horns he needed. Upon seeing the horn, the man was shocked, unable to believe his eyes. But what made him even more shocked was the next words of the guy who said that he had 100 horns. X also added with a warm smile on his face that he owed Mr. Rubin even more, and would always be grateful to him. The same with tears of joy in his eyes sincerely thanked the protagonist, saying that thanks to the horns that he brought, he will be able to save his store. The protagonist replied with a smile that he wouldn't want the store to close. The next moment the system sent him a message that his reputation had increased by 10 points. Mr. Rubin, on the other hand, continued to thank X, saying that from now on he promises to pay him the maximum price for his goods, and also promised that he would share the latest information with him. The shopkeeper's words of information interested the protagonist. After all, if he wanted to defeat the traders alone, he needed information that they did not possess. Thanking the man for the generous offer, he said goodbye that they would see each other later. Some time later our protagonist arrived at the central square of the city, where there was a restaurant Kalen's. The kitchen of the restaurant was very noisy, as everyone was doing their own thing. In front of the protagonist stood a large middle-aged man, who possessed golden hair and was also wearing a blue apron. He was none other than the owner of Kalen Restaurant who had the profession of chef. Turning to X, he asked if he wanted to learn cooking from him. To which our protagonist replied in a firm voice that he did, for he had heard that he was the best chef in Narville. Some time ago at Mr. Rubin's store. With his hands folded in front of him, X turned to the storekeeper and asked him if he knew where there was a good chef in town. To which he replied that he knew one, but that he was so eccentric that an ordinary man could not even talk to him. Even so, he remained the best cook in all of Narville. Worried that X would not be kicked out as soon as he arrived, Mr. Rubin said he would write him a letter of recommendation. Clenching his huge hand into a fist, and looking contemptuously at the guy in front of him, Carlin asked who he was, and that he had come to learn how to cook normal food, not the garbage that people eat every day. This treatment discouraged the protagonist a bit, as the cook was even more harsh than he thought. However, there was no way to retreat, as this was his only chance, which he did not want to miss. Taking off his shoulder pad, he asked for permission to prove that he was worthy of learning from him. The protagonist was confident in his cooking skills, and was now ready to make him change his mind by showing him everything he had learned in his 2 years of working at the restaurant. Ignoring the annoyed words of the cook who still didn't like the idea, X stood in front of the table. Looking at the ingredients, he noted that they were different from the ingredients of the real world, so his task was to try to combine similar things as much as he could. First he decided to use milk to get rid of the smell of raw meat. The next step was to spread the meat evenly on a mixture of flour and eggs. And the final step was to fry it all in oil at a medium temperature of 170 degrees. Seeing the way the guy was cooking, Carlin irritatedly said that it was just normal fried food. Hearing that, X told himself that the guy would surely change his mind when he added the ingredient that would put this dish together. That ingredient wasn't available in the real world, and it was called Heavenly Touch. Behind the protagonist appeared the image of the hermit he had met earlier. And the very next moment after activating the skill, the dish glowed with a bright golden light, while he himself seemed to have an epiphany. Watching it all with his glowing golden eyes, he wondered if he was the only one who had seen it. Deciding not to dwell on it, he began to vigorously move his hands around the dish. Thanks to the skill, his hands could do what he lacked in his cooking skills. As he finished cooking the dish, he made a final sweep of his hand, causing the dish to glow even brighter. The cooking was finished, and a bowl of golden chicken legs appeared in front of the cook, making him hungry just looking at them. Smelling the aroma and seeing a dish unknown to them before, the other cooks were shocked and drool instantly flowed from their mouths. Watching this with a satisfied smile, X told himself that their reaction was expected since the dish was prepared with the heavenly touch. Even with all his skepticism, Carlin looked at the dish and noted that it looked rather unusual. With a thoughtful hand resting on his chin, he added that he had definitely prepared an interesting dish. However, the only way to be sure was to taste it, which he did. The next moment, his eyes widened in surprise. Memories of when he had tasted divine food once before immediately appeared in his mind. The sensations and emotions he experienced back then were forever etched in his memory. Seeing the strange behavior of their boss, the other employees started to ask him if he was all right. Suddenly tears streamed down Carlin's face. All those who had known him for a long time were shocked as they could not believe that he could cry. So they started asking him again if he was okay. The next moment his fist hit the table with force. Then he ordered everyone to shut up in an irritated voice, adding that they were closing early today. For the first time in a long time, Carlin's restaurant closed earlier than usual. Sitting at a table across from the main character, the Carlin chef asked him if his name was X. To which he replied that it was. After these words there was an awkward pause at the table. After a moment it was broken by Carlin, asking the protagonist if he had heard of the Gourmet King before. Such a question puzzled X a bit. After thinking about it, he replied that he had indeed heard of him somewhere before. Hearing the guy's answer, the man said that then he must have also heard of the legend that said that he appeared when the kingdom of Arba was founded, where he had left his legend. However, one day he disappeared somewhere without a trace. Hearing this, the protagonist wondered if the old man he had met earlier could be the king of gourmets. Carlin went on to say that he could feel his touch in his food, but added that it was probably because his recipes had spread throughout the world. The protagonist only smiled in response, musing to himself that he was just doing the same thing he did at his regular job. Taking his glass and looking at it glumly, Carlin said that he believed that those who knew the Gourmet King's recipes should also learn his story. He began his story by saying that 300 years ago, it was the Gourmet King who founded the kingdom of Arba. These words struck X so hard that he jumped up from the table and exclaimed in amazement. 300 years ago, the plains of Arba. Being a traveler, the king of the gourmets came to these plains where at that time there was absolutely nothing. And seeing the beauty and fertility of these places, he decided to build a kingdom for his people and call it the Kingdom of Arba. According to his plan, this kingdom was to be a paradise for his family and his people. One day, however, he suddenly disappeared. The empty throne was immediately taken over by Lars Loren, who was the right hand of the Gourmet King. With power in his hands, he decided to execute all the servants who had served the past king. After hearing the chief's story, X was very impressed with how amazing the Gourmet King was. He was able to almost single-handedly establish an entire kingdom. But what bothered him the most was why such an amazing man had given him his powers. Clenching his hand into a fist, he wondered if it was his responsibility to restore the kingdom as well as its recipes. Did he really trust him that much? But he also realized that for a newcomer like him, no wonder everything seemed so abnormal to him. Turning his gaze to Carlin, he wondered if he knew the history of the Gourmet King. Could it mean that he also knew his recipes? And since he didn't know that, the best solution was to act now. Turning to Chief Carlin, he told the man that he knew that his words were hard to believe, then informed him that he was actually a descendant of the Gourmet King. After saying that, the man's eyebrows furrowed even more, and he asked the guy what he was talking about. Then pointing a finger at the protagonist, he said that if he wanted him to believe that he was the heir of the Gourmet King. He turned around and went to the table and added that he had to prove it. Carlin went to the table and took a knife and started cooking, showing his masterful skills at it. Continuing to cook the dish on the fire, he said that if he really was his heir, he would have to feel the secret of his dish at once. Placing a dish in front of the protagonist that smelled very nice and looked very attractive, he said that this was the dish his grandfather had served to the gourmet king himself many years ago. Taking a spoonful of the food, X brought it to his mouth. After eating just a spoonful, he was amazed at the flavor of the dish. The system immediately sent a message that a hidden flavor, memory stew, had been detected in the food. Furthermore, the experience that was condensed into memory stew was internalized in his body. In addition, a notification window appeared in front of him, informing him that he had obtained the Kalshmar the Shield ability, which paved the way for him to fully master the art of shield techniques. With this ability, when he blocked a shield strike, the opponent's strike would be reduced by 30%. Also, when attacking a monster with his shield, there was a 50% chance of victory. In addition, his attack power is directly proportional to his defense when attacking with a shield. After reading the information about the new ability, the protagonist was a bit surprised, and he immediately had an idea. He asked Carlin if his great-grandfather was once called Kalshmar the Shield. When he heard this, he shouted excitedly how he knew. Adding that did he really only realize it by eating stew? Then saying that his great-grandfather had told him that the king of gourmets was also able to realize things just by tasting them. Realizing that the guy in front of him was indeed the chosen one, he excitedly grabbed X's hand and said that he was very happy that finally after 300 years there was a successor to the gourmet king. As soon as Carlin calmed down and came to his senses, the protagonist asked him if he could teach him the recipe he had taken from the gourmet king. Carlin replied that he would like to do so, but he had never prepared the full recipe, as it was too difficult for him to get the key ingredient. And the difficulty was that for the full recipe, he had to get the meat of a black cave bear, which was the main boss in the northern zone, which could only mean one thing: he was strong. Chief Carlin, realizing that the guy was going on a dangerous mission, gave him a stormtrooper armor, telling him that he would definitely help him. Putting on the armor and armed with a sword, X thanked him, thinking happily that he had managed to get a full outfit so easily. However, the surprises didn't end there, and in the next moment, Carlin handed him a bottle of potion, which looked very expensive, and also shone with a bright light. A system window appeared in front of the protagonist, stating that this potion was called Lower Flames Essence. This flask contained the essence of the tribe. If you soaked your equipment with it, it would have the properties of the fire element. In addition, the bonus was low-level fire damage. This was just in time, as the monsters in the north were resistant to cold but weak against fire. To motivate him even more, Carlin added that if he managed to hunt the bear successfully, he could teach him the recipe, and after preparing it, they could try it together. The next moment a system window appeared in front of X again, displaying a task called Carlin's Dream. It was reported that the latter's dream was to finish the recipe of the king of gourmets, which he himself could not do due to low combat skills. The main character's task was to help him realize his dream, for which he was to receive Carlin's restaurant VIP pass as a reward. After activating the Flame Essence potion, which was immediately applied to his equipment, X clenched his hand into a fist and resolutely said that he would definitely realize his dream. Some time later in the northern snowy fields. Walking through the mountainous terrain covered with snow, the protagonist dressed in a long cloak, exhaling steam from his mouth, annoyed that it was really cold in the north. Seeing the white wolf in front of him, and taking out his sword from his inventory, he told himself that without Carlin's equipment and fire essence he would have a hard time traveling here. Swinging the sword and chopping off the wolf's head, he immediately received a notification from the system that he had earned experience. Looking at his status window, he was surprised at the amount of experience he was able to gain by hunting in the snow fields. The fact that he was able to reach level 34 made him wonder if he could defeat a bear at that level, maybe with a critical hit. But his musings were interrupted by someone's desperate voice calling for help. Turning around, he saw a short human figure nearby, approached at high speed by a white wolf. Looking closely at the figure, X realized that it was the figure of a child, who judging from the screams was very frightened, and had no strength to resist the wolf. Maliciously opening its toothy maw, the wolf lunged at the boy, who closed his eyes and screamed in panic to get away from him. However, the wolf's maw failed to reach its goal, as its neck suddenly separated from its body. Standing in front of the puzzled boy and holding his sword in his hand, the protagonist asked the boy in a relaxed voice if he was okay. The boy stammered as he looked at the dead wolf who had already started to disappear. When he came to his senses, the boy began to thank X from the bottom of his heart, saying that he had only survived thanks to his help. He then introduced himself as Ron Tyler, eldest son of the noble Tyler family of Veneta. These words surprised the protagonist very much. Everyone in the world of Fate has their own status, and not only royal tasks and noble NPCs become more difficult, because they even give out large rewards corresponding to their status. Smiling back at the boy and introducing himself as X, the protagonist said that he was glad to meet him. To which the boy replied that it was nice to meet him too. Wrapping himself more tightly in his cloak, Ron asked X if he would like to stay at his mansion for a while. He added that he would like to tell him more about their situation, but because of their family's pride, they couldn't talk about it just like that. Hearing the boy's words, the protagonist was interested, and he was cold and had plenty of time to find a new recipe. So he told the boy that he didn't mind and told him to show him the way. The boy nodded happily in response. After a while they arrived at the Tyler's mansion, which appeared to be in a very abandoned state. Entering the building, and following the boy down a similarly unkept corridor, the walls of which were cracked in many places, X wondered if this was really where the nobles had lived. Passing a portrait of a gray-haired middle-aged man dressed in formal clothes, Ron called him father and said he was back. Passing by the kitchen, the protagonist also noted that among other things, those had also run out of food. Suddenly, a golden-haired woman peeked out from one side, greeting the boy. Holding her hand was an equally golden-haired little girl. Turning to Ron, X asked him if he was the only visitor, to which he replied that he was, since it was just him, his sick mom, and his sister. Hearing this, the protagonist asked if he could use their kitchen. This question surprised the boy, but he still gave his consent. After a while in the kitchen, Ron watched with open mouth drooling as X prepared the food. Stirring everything and roasting it on the fire, he said that since he didn't have many ingredients, it wouldn't take long to cook. When everyone was seated at the table where the food he had prepared was, he suggested that they start eating, saying that he would also like to learn more about them. The protagonist introduced himself as a famous gourmet. However, no one answered him, as everyone was busy devouring the food, and after a couple of minutes the pot in the middle of the table was already empty. Seeing this, X thought to himself that they must have really been starving for days. After some more time, everyone finished eating. Turning to X, Ron said that he couldn't believe that he was serving such a great guest, then thanking him for the delicious food, he said that he swore on his family's honor that he would never forget his favor. To which the latter replied that he was glad they had enjoyed it. The little girl with a happy face and holding a spoon in her hands, happily said that she would never forget him either, as his food was very tasty. Hearing this, the main character couldn't help but smile. Then Ron also added that their mother was also grateful for such a delicious meal, to which he replied that there was nothing special about his food. When the boy had finished his pleasantries, he said in a firm voice that before they got down to business he would like to tell him the reason why the Tyler house had fallen down. And he began by saying that the reason their family had lived in the cold northern mountains for generations was because the mansion was connected to a dungeon that was called the Graveyard of Strange Branches. The dungeon was crawling with many monsters, but their family had a clue that had been passed down from generation to generation. It said that there was treasure at the end of the dungeon. His father was one of those who believed in these words, so he gathered a squad to fight the monsters in the dungeon. They even hired mercenaries, spent a huge amount of money to equip them, and spent decades preparing and fighting. However, despite the amount of monsters they killed and the number of floors they traveled through, they gained nothing. The strange thing was that the monsters in this dungeon didn't even drop the usual accessories. And as a result, after spending all their energy and money on all of this, they naturally fell into disrepair. In addition, their father eventually died on one of the raids. After finishing his story, Ron said with firm conviction that he wanted to prove that the Tyler family legends were not lies, and that his father was not wrong to follow them either. Turning to X, he said that he would like to ask him to explore the dungeon again. In front of the protagonist suddenly appeared a system window with a mission, which was called Legend of the Tyler Family. The conditions to finish the mission were to explore the dungeon. The difficulty of the mission was C, while the reward was a trusted relationship with the Tyler household. After reading the conditions, X couldn't help but smile, as although the reward for completion was a bit disappointing, but the experience for going through the dungeon alone was a win-win. Therefore, he immediately agreed to help the boy. As he walked down the steps to the dungeon, he thought about how this game was different from what he had played before, because since the map was much larger, it was much harder to find the dungeon. In addition, it was almost impossible to go through the dungeons alone, because the dungeons found immediately monopolized by different guilds, and the fact that he was able to find a hidden dungeon was a huge stroke of luck. Suddenly, behind the protagonist, the head of a skeleton dressed in a helmet appeared. However, in the next moment, he cut off his head in a split second, thinking to himself that if the monsters were even at the entrance to the dungeon, then he will not be bored here. As soon as the skeleton dissolved, X immediately received a notification from the system that his level had risen. Seeing this, he was surprised at the amount of experience he got for killing a normal skeleton, as he got much more experience than he usually got from fighting outside. However, there was no real prey to eat, so he decided to move on, as he needed to keep his hunger in check. After 5 hours of passing the dungeon, in front of the protagonist finally appeared Graveyard of Strange Branches, which according to information from the system window was the boss of this dungeon. He looked a bit like Groot, but he was much uglier, plus he possessed some magic, which he would next release straight into X. However, despite its power, it never managed to reach the guy's body. Because in the next moment, he effortlessly blocked the attack with his shield, which gave him 30% protection when blocked with his shield. The ugly Groot cosplayer let out a furious roar. However, he didn't have time to get angry at all, as the very next moment X pushed himself off the ground, blocking 2 more magic attacks flying at him. He jumped high into the air and swung his sword above him, about to deliver the decisive blow. With his eyes burning golden light, he fiercely struck the boss. In the next instant, shining golden streaks of light appeared on the boss's body. This was a victory. As soon as the body of the defeated boss began to dissolve, X immediately received notifications that he had leveled up and also cleared the dungeon. While he was standing in front of the crater that was left after the monster, he again received a notification that he had received the title, Solo Clearer, which he received for being able to single-handedly clear the dungeons of Tyler Mansion. This title increased all stats by 5% and also reduced damage by 10, as long as he cleared the dungeon alone. Throwing the sword on his shoulder, X told himself that he would need this title since he would probably be entering dungeons alone many more times. However, even after defeating the boss and clearing the dungeons, he still hadn't found any treasure or anything like that, which could only mean that the legend was a lie. But suddenly an idea popped into his head. Leaning over the ground, he used the Heavenly Grind skill, and in the next instant, the system reported that he had found an item. The item was a branch called Branch of Pure Spirit. It had a unique quality and could create a flame that ignited the spirit. The holy flame lasts semi-permanently. The special effect was that it reacted to darkness. Looking at the burning branch, which could serve as an excellent torch, the protagonist noted that he had no idea what effect the holy flame had. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a wall that, when he shone the torch on it, began to glow in some places. Interested in this, he stepped closer. The next moment a sign appeared saying that the sacred flame had begun to react to the darkness. Suddenly, the protagonist realized that the holy flame reacts to dark energy. The wall he was shining the torch on not only sparkled, but shone with precious stones. That's when X realized that this was the treasure. So, after he had cleared and found the treasure Ron had told him about, he returned to the Tyler family home. Ron, who was waiting for him in the house, was worried that X had gone down to the dungeon by himself. So when he returned unharmed, the boy was very happy. He scratched the back of his head and said that he was very worried and thought he was just wasting his time, but he was very sorry for that. After all, it was just a legend and he wasn't sure if it was true. Then X laughed and said, "What waste of time is he talking about? After all, his father was not mistaken at all, the treasures were really there." Ron was confused and asked what X was referring to. What treasures were he talking about? X looked at the boy and said that it would probably be better for him to see for himself. Then he pulled out a large piece of gemstone from his pocket and showed it to Ron. The latter was very surprised to see it for real. He could not believe that the legend was true, there were indeed treasures in the dungeon. Then X explained that it was dark iron. Dark iron is a rare material that is considered one of the 5 best in the world of Fate. It has a hardness incomparable to steel and has the characteristic given to dark attribute if the equipment is made of dark iron. Because the dark attribute is a cheating attribute that is superior to all attributes except the light attribute, that is why dark iron is priced incredibly high. Ron then grabbed a piece of dark iron and fell to his knees with it, he could not believe what he was seeing. He leaned down hugging the piece of iron and started crying saying that his father was right. Wiping away his tears, Ron said he would definitely rebuild his family and make his mother and sister happy. He added that his father should keep an eye on him. Then he suddenly grabbed X's hand and began to thank him, saying that he didn't even know how to repay him for this great favor. He was confused, because he did not expect to see such a reaction. X laughed shyly, scratched his head and said he would come back later, but he had to go. Then Ron stopped him and said he had something he wanted to give him right now. He held out his hands and told him to take it. It was a precious thing. Immediately a system window appeared with a description of the item. It was the coat of arms of House Taylor, unique, the noble family of Aneta. The user would be recognized as a member of House Taylor and would receive a plus 100 boost to their reputation. The special effect is that the user can exert influence at the same level as House Tyler, and the influence can vary depending on the prestige of House Tyler. Holding this item in his hands, X asked, "Isn't this thing unique?" He then smiled and thanked Ron for this precious item and said that the Tyler house would definitely rise again. X left the Tyler house and continued on his way into the snow-covered mountain, waving goodbye to Ron. Ron smiled and also waved goodbye to X and wished him to take care of himself. With a slight smile, Ron told the boy, who had almost disappeared into the horizon, that his blessings would always be with him in the future. X's next target was a black cave bear, which is called a monster similar to field bosses. It has overwhelming strength and special effects compared to his level. After it is destroyed, ready-made equipment drops out of it, which can only be seen in bosses, so many users hunt for such bears. The peculiarity of the Black Cave Bear boss was its level, which was unknown. In the middle of the snow-capped mountains, 6 unknown players stood on a rift near a cave. They were divided into 2 groups, with the first group standing next to the cave complaining about the cold and the fact that there were no monsters on this side. In the other group, someone said that someone had probably already hunted them. X was among these people. Listening to the conversation, he said that thinking about it, they would never catch him in their lives. He added that hunting is about waiting. X frowned, looked around the place and said that there were really not enough monsters. Then, as he walked forward, the snow crunched under his feet, and X assumed that someone might be monopolizing the hunting grounds. Suddenly, someone shouted that he was satisfied that he had taken control of everyone else and offered to clear the area for their hunting and not to bother them. X was surprised and looked at what was happening. The protagonist was standing on a hill and watching these unknown people who shouted this, so he asked what these guys were doing. They appeared unexpectedly and were already claiming this place as their own. They were going to get all the monsters themselves, and then X was very angry and said that of course he knew it would happen. Can't they see that other users are waiting? And he called them damned bastards. Then, going downstairs, X said that they even placed high-level players to keep this good place for monster hunting, but no one invited them. Then these players noticed someone coming down. As X approached, he heard that he was being addressed, and the stranger called him a treasure and told him that this hunting ground was theirs and that they should leave while he was still good. This surprised the already angry man. After listening to this, X said that they were ridiculous. This surprised the strangers. Then X got ready and offered a match against each other. He added that he would show them how ruthless he could be. This stranger turned to X and told him to be careful and think about what he was saying, that he could consult with him about it and get out of here. X laughed sarcastically and asked the stranger if he was just going to say that. He told him not to waste his time and just attack him. Then this unfamiliar player got really angry and shouted, asking if he knew what level he was at, what he was talking about fighting against each other. He asked if he wanted to be thrown out of the game today. A notification window appeared in front of both of them, and the stranger said that he agreed and accepted the fight. When the stranger saw X's level, he was surprised, only level 50. He is even more of a loser than he thought. Then the unknown player grabbed a spear and mockingly said that only level 50 dares to challenge him is ridiculous to him, and added that he would make him regret it. The battle started, the unfamiliar player rushed at X with a spear and he didn't stand aside and started fighting. Everything around him sparkled. Sparks flew from the spear and the stranger could not realize that his opponent had just knocked his spear away. X had incredible strength, he had invincible power. The player was amazed that he had struck him in just a few seconds. And he was able to deflect his spear so easily. X hit the stranger right in the chest with his invincible strength. The stranger was confused, he didn't understand what the hell was going on and whether this bastard was really only level 50, he thought that X was too fast for him to keep up. Then the protagonist struck another strong and fast blow, and the stranger was able to deflect it with his spear. But having deflected this blow, he shouted that this is some kind of madness, how can it be, right? But X ruthlessly delivered blow after blow. But the unfamiliar player mentally calmed himself down and asked him not to panic. He had to find his weakness and break through, there had to be some weakness. But suddenly, after another blow from X, something incredible happened, the spear of the stranger was shattered into small pieces. The stranger shouted that this was ridiculous. He was simply destroyed, just like his spear. Suddenly, a notification window appeared in front of the stranger, informing him that the battle was over and he was defeated. The people who came with the unfamiliar player were confused, couldn't believe that their guild leader was defeated, and asked who was this guy. Who was the guy who defeated their leader? Then X pointed his sword at them and said that this land was now his to hunt and they should leave immediately. X was left alone among the snow-capped peaks to hunt further. Looking around the area around the cave where the bear might have been, he said that he had just wasted his time with these distrustful boys. Looking around, he said that he had heard that a black cave bear appears in this place. The one he was hunting for. He thought that he should look for the tracks of the black cave bear near the lake and headed there. It was near the lake that he found the tracks. But even if it is a black cave bear, it is still an animal, it will eventually want to drink water. But suddenly he saw something that surprised him. A system window appeared next to the tracks he found, informing him that he had found the tracks of a black cave bear. Then he happily shouted out that he had finally found it. He decided to follow the tracks and assumed that if he followed them, he would find the current location of the black cave bear. Just as he thought, the tracks led him to a large black cave. He took a closer look at the black cave. He noticed two red lights shining from it. Looking closer, he realized that he had found exactly what he was looking for. It was a black cave bear. The cave was incredibly large, and the bear itself could barely fit in it. His eyes were burning with red fire and he roared fiercely, and his incredibly large and powerful size inspired fear. But despite the fact that the black cave bear was really big and powerful, X was happy because it was easy enough to find. When the bear saw X, it roared fiercely. Suddenly, a system window appeared informing him that he was able to resist the fear of the big cave bear. Holding his sword at the ready, X laughed and said that he was very happy about it. He wasn't afraid of the bear at all, he was only interested in what he could get for defeating it. The bear rushed toward the boy to remove the unexpected guest from his path. His eyes were burning with red flames of rage. The bear rose up on its hind legs and started swinging its powerful big paws to knock X down, but he was quick and managed to dodge the bear's attacks. X was determined to win, so he thought he could finally use another skill he had never used. It was a shield-like skill that increased the chance of stunning by 50% during an attack and dealt damage proportional to the defense. It was a large and shiny Kalshmar shield, and X took it out of his inventory and held it up in front of him. The bear roared even louder and more fiercely. The fierce roar of the bear created a sound wave that almost threw the boy away, but he was strong and kept his feet well. It was time to go all in, so X decided that the best option was to go straight for the bear, so he stepped back and jumped right into the bear's mouth. But the bear wasn't going to wait to be beaten on the spot, so he tried his best to finish off his opponent. The bear didn't know what was happening, so it retreated into the cave, and X was getting closer and closer, his shield shining with a bright glow that the bear didn't like. A system window appeared, informing him that the black cave bear could not resist status effects, and another window said that the black cave bear was stunned. X thought that it was only a stun and needed to finish everything faster before the stun passed, so he started to advance on the bear faster and faster. He found some weakness in the bear's strategy, so he flashed his shield and got even closer. He shouted, "There," and shined his shield light on the bear. For a few seconds, the bear lost its sight. But this was enough for X, so with lightning speed he took his sword and pierced the bear through. Its body sparkled with golden luster, the beast was defeated. X walked away from the beast, which fell to the ground with a heavy burden, its body pierced by many golden rays, and the system window informed X that he had risen to a new level. X sat down near the place where the bear had just been lying, and in its place shone the objects that fall from the bear after its victory. Collecting them, X thought he would have to fight for at least 2 or 3 more rounds. But it seems he has become so strong that he can defeat the monster with just one punch. The item that dropped after the fight with the bear was the Winter Forest Blessing armor. This armor had superior defense, which compared to the sheet armor was imbued with the power of the Winter Forest. The special effects of this armor were that it reduced the damage taken by a few %, but the amount of damage that could be reduced increased with the armor's strength. X immediately used this armor and it appeared on his body. Looking at himself, he said that it was very cool and he was lucky that he found this bear and was able to get this armor. Another item that dropped after the battle was the condensed meat of a black cave bear. It was meat full of flavor, but different for everyone. The special effects were an increased likelihood of vomiting if consumed raw. Holding a piece of meat, X noticed that this meat was very different from what he expected. But he was going to try to eat it anyway. A system window appeared, informing him that the heavenly flavor revealed the hidden taste of condensed cave bear meat. Another information window informed him that the strong game flavor of cave meat is absorbed in the body. X decided to try a piece of this meat and really didn't like it. He took it a little further away from his face and said that he couldn't eat it. Then he raised his hand, which shone with a golden glow, and said that even if the game smell was strong, he had a heavenly skill and smiled. His skill was heavenly cuisine. He tried to use the heavenly kitchen. But nothing happened, so he didn't understand why there was no reaction. He assumed that the skill probably didn't exist because there were no recipes. Or maybe even the heavenly kitchen refused to eat cave bear meat. But then he thought that he just needed to cook this tasteless meat to be happy and eat it. So he picked out all the spices he had and started cooking. Once he figured it out, he decided to start with frying. Meanwhile, at the Fate Game Company, Meiji Corporation. The company's employees were sitting at their desks talking, and the guy turned to the senior manager and said that it was a pity that there were not enough jobs. But it seems that everyone has potential here. The older man replied that this was an opportunity that could change their lives, so he was sure that many people had been preparing for it very hard. Then the older one added that the younger one could receive donations for his streams, and the company would even pay his salary, and smiled. But he continued, even if you compare it to money, will the fame be greater? The guy really didn't like what the older man said. The older man kept talking and said that of course the name, Fate Streamer, alone would definitely make him a famous person. He is gaining popularity only because of someone's incredible pleasure in watching someone else's game. Fate is currently preparing a personalized streaming platform that synchronizes in real life. The company was going to accept applications from only 30 Fate streamers, among many applicants. Then the senior continued that in this sense, it would inevitably be a disappointment for many. After all, it was obvious that the positions of the main streamers that would be chosen this time would be taken by strong players like Kaimus. Then the boy turned to the older man and asked him what he thought about the director and his unusual behavior, which he found very strange. Then the older man asked why he was asking for the director, why he needed to talk about him. Then the young man continued that he usually doesn't touch their work, so he didn't know why the director was interfering in this project. Then the older man said he wasn't sure if he could call it interference. But the guy continued that it was true, he just recommended one streamer. Of course, it's probably interesting to know which single user the director chose. Even to gain the trust of NPC players, they do their best. They become an important help in achieving the goal, their understanding of fate is very impressive. They don't make mistakes for the sake of instant profit and are meticulous even in the smallest details. A hidden gem deserves a chance. It was a player named X. The man laughed and said that, besides, the moment when Fate's story changes one by one because of his actions. He liked that. Looking at this, the man said that it would be too mean of him to enjoy it himself. This man was the president of Meiji Corporations, Dr. Schubert. Meanwhile, in the game, X was trying to cook cave bear meat. He used the wrong recipe again and the meat didn't turn out right. While tasting the meat, he said that at times like this he wished his tongue was normal. Looking at the cooked meat, X thought that his heavenly taste makes anything delicious, so it is difficult to cook food that others will like. How could he make it so that other people could eat it? But then he realized something. He thought, why is he trying to cook delicious food for other people? And what was the point? He looked at the place of cooking. It would be enough if he just enjoyed the food. Thinking about this, he looked at the meat that was cooking on the fire, grabbed it and tasted it. Suddenly, an information window appeared, announcing that Heavenly Taste had found a hidden flavor in the first recipe of the king of gourmet food. X realized that it was simply an unbeatable flavor. Suddenly, he bent over backwards and shone from within with a golden light. And everything around him shone with golden rays. The illusion returned again. He fell into the illusion of the past. There were two people on the lawn, one of them was eating, and X did not understand what this place was. The one who was eating asked the other if he was really not hungry. But the other one in the red cape said that he would be fine, that it was important whether he knew they were surrounded. X thought that this man eating was the king of gourmets and he was pretty clean at this point, and wondered who the man in the red cape could be. Suddenly, from somewhere on the other side, he heard shouting, which he turned to. It was the army, they were shouting that they were coming to attack and there were only two enemies. Then a man in a red cloak jumped up and took a shield and said that Kalshmar would not lower his guard for a moment. Then X realized that the man in the red cloak was Kalshmar. The man in the red cloak shone with a bright radiance, even his eyes shone. The radiance seemed to come from within. He stood with his legs wide apart, it was a bear's posture. The army could not understand what was happening, they were confused. Kalshmar raised his fist and punched the ground with all his might. The earth split into several pieces, cracks went in different directions from the impact. But everything was pierced by golden rays. X was amazed, it was a bear's posture, he realized that this was the power of the man who became king. So Kalshmar smashed the earth with his fist with all his might and caused the army to become terrified. The earth began to crack in different directions, and golden rays of radiance pierced through the cracks in the earth. X was amazed at what he saw. He thought that this was the bear's posture, that this was the power of the man who had become king. The army shouted, and the cracks in the ground grew larger. The radiance was blinding the soldiers, and they could not do anything about it or resist it. Looking at what was happening, X shouted that the elite troops were destroyed in an instant. It happened so quickly and without much effort. The majestic figure of the mighty Kalshmar disappeared into the distance, his red cloak blowing in the wind, and dust and sparks flying in the air that had appeared from the ground. He looked back and looked toward X. X came back from the illusion of the past, exhaled and said that there are degrees of loss of balance in such power, it is against the rules. The information window appeared again, saying that Heavenly Taste had discovered the hidden flavor in the first recipe of the King of Gourmets. The next information source said that a force that could shake heaven and earth was being absorbed into his body. Another news alert provided information that he had acquired the unique skill of bear posture. The new bear posture skill is a gourmet king's technique to shake heaven and earth with power. After fully mastering this skill, it can be used as a great source of strength. When used, strength increases by an additional 100% for 30 minutes and is 100% immune to all abnormal status effects. After reviewing the information that he had gained this skill that he had just admired, X was very excited. He was so excited that he said that with this power he even had a chance to take on an entire army. The power he received was incredible. X left the cave and looked at the snow-capped mountains. It was an incredibly beautiful landscape. The mountains were hiding behind each other and yet each one was majestic. X looked around and said that it was all very beautiful. Then he looked at the meat on the grill and said that he had finished the recipe for black cave bear meat, so he needed to return to Kalen soon. He smiled and said that if he used the bear's stance well, he could take without any threats at least 10 people as his company on his way to the top of this world in this multiplayer game. But for now, he was traveling alone. X continued on his way, but several people were watching him. They were hiding behind a large rock behind him, one of them even had a sword. One of them looked at X and noticed the armor he was wearing and asked if it was a blessing of the winter forest, or if he was lucky today. After all, this armor was quite rare. Then this thief said that he didn't know what kind of guy X was, but this armor was a gift for him, he would use it well instead. He pulled his hand out of his pocket and clenched it into a fist and said that although he looked like that, he was a man who was good at dogfighting. Then X heard some strange sounds behind him and shouted that whoever was there should not hide like a rat and come out to fight. The strangers who were hiding behind the stones jumped out and one of them called X a brazen bastard. The others shouted that they would stab him right now. They appeared around X. There were about 8 of them and one of them laughed and said, "Does he think he can fight them all together?" X was completely calm and looked at them and said that it was probably a bit much. The other one, who was holding 2 daggers, shouted that if he didn't fight, it would be useless. Probably one of the leaders of this group shouted that there was no one stronger than him on this earth and that X could not defeat him. Then X suddenly noticed that all the members of this group had very small and red eyes. They were fraudsters. In Fate, if you repeat evil deeds, your reputation drops to 0. Fame turns into notoriety, and users become villains. The characteristic that would allow users to recognize villains was the red eyes. Realizing who he saw in front of him, X smiled. Then he grabbed his sword and said that he had tried something and it worked well. One of the crooks asked what he was muttering under his breath. So X decided to try a new skill he had recently learned called bear stance, and he shouted and took the required stance. Around him, cracks in the ground appeared, stones flew in different directions, and some of the crooks even fell to their knees. It was the first time they had seen such a thing, they did not understand what it was. The ground was splitting more and more, and those golden rays appeared. The recharge of this bear posture, every 24 hours, the amplifying effect lasts 30 minutes. X thought that 30 minutes was enough, grabbed his sword and stabbed it into the ground. His eyes glowed, stones and sparks flew around, golden rays spilled out and his cloak was fluttering in the wind. When X started using this stance, the swindlers even started laughing and one asked what he was going to do burying himself in the ground. And when they saw what was happening, they realized that they could not defeat him, it was an invincible force. After all the crooks were defeated, then throwing his sword over his shoulder X said, "There was no crazy strike here, was there?" He laughed and said that he needed to go hunting quickly before the effect of this skill wore off, he didn't want to waste time. Then he sat down next to the crooks who were lying on the floor, laughed and said that he would take care of everything for them. After a while, X was already in town. Near a restaurant in the central square of Nerville. A blond man asked who it could be. When he saw a guy he knew. A notification window announced that the search for the recipe of the King of Gourmets quest was complete. X then went up to the man and told him that he was home now. The man's name was Chef Cologne. The chef laughed and put his hand on X's shoulder and said that looking at this armor, the blessing of the winter forest, he must have been successful in hunting the cave bear. He added that he had definitely completed the unfinished first recipe. Then X laughed and said that everything was exactly as he said and asked if the chef wanted him to do it for him right now. The chef refused and said that he could just say that he had already eaten it. But the cave bear meat was already ready and X said that the chef could just taste it. The meat was already on the plate, it was the first recipe of the king for gourmet cooking, black cave bear. The chef took the meat anyway and said that if so, then maybe he would have a good meal and tried a piece of meat. But the chef didn't like the meat and spat it out immediately. Then X thought that it would probably be hard for others to eat this meat, but it was delicious for him. Wiping his mouth with his hand, the chef said that X had definitely finished the recipe, but he had heard that they said the cave black bear dishes were so bad that they couldn't be eaten. But he added that it was still true. Just like Kalshmar's great-grandfather used to say. Then the chief shook hands with X and thanked him for making his dream come true and said that if he needed his help in the future or was hungry, he should contact him. Looking at his hand, he smiled sincerely. X shook hands with the chef and said that if so, he would definitely come back to see him. He then asked X where he planned to go next. He said that as the heir to the King of Gourmets, he thought he would start looking for other recipes. The chef agreed and said that before he left, he had something to tell him. Then he went on to say that he actually knew where his family member was. X was very surprised and asked the chef if this was true. Then the chef said that it was, but that old man was one grumpy guy, which made X laugh. Then X thought, grumpy, how old is he? The old man's name was Liglian Grutch. He lived 300 years ago. To be more precise, he was a vassal who, together with his great-grandfather Kalshmar, helped the Gourmet King. The Gourmet King suddenly disappeared and time passed. That old man went beyond loyalty and became crooked. To the point where he even denied his death. To be reunited with the King of Gourmet who would return someday, that he was already completely worn out and half a skeleton. He had become someone who had become undead himself. Then X raised his hands to the table and clasped them together and said with a thoughtful expression that this man was Liglian. Still thinking, he suggested that perhaps he was an unreasonable man. If you go straight west from Narville, you can see the sea. If you get close to 3 small and large villages, you can hear the sound of waves, it's the beach of the dead. So X had already been to the beach of the dead. It didn't look scary at all. It was an ordinary beach and an ordinary sea. At that moment, a boy and a girl were swimming in the sea and having fun. He asked a man who was fishing there about this place and he said, "What beach of the dead is he talking about?" He had never heard of it, it was the Sea of Lovers. This place is very popular with young people. Chewing on his food, X said that no matter how much he looked around, this was really the right place. Suddenly, the notification window announced that Heavenly Taste had discovered a hidden flavor in the orange juice. But X didn't pay attention to it, he had other things on his mind. It was impossible that Kalen had lied to him, then maybe the beach of the dead was a hidden place. As he ate the other dishes again, his information window informed him that his maximum health had increased by 5 points, and another information window informed him that Heavenly Taste had discovered a hidden flavor in the bidal kebabs that X was eating at the time. He speculated further that maybe this place was only for those who met special conditions and then they could find the beach of the dead. Then, having filled his mouth with food, he thought, what should he do then? Behind him, a couple was talking. The guy asked the girl if they would go swimming in the sea, she said she liked it very much. Then X threw all the food he had in his hands backwards, which flew right at the couple. He said he needed to find a way to at least increase his fishing stats. The sea was crashing against the rocks with violent waves. X threw a fishing rod with a float into the sea to catch a fish. Suddenly the float dived under the water, which meant that a fish had been caught on its hook. He pulled the fish out of the water, and it was indeed a fish that had been caught on his hook, and it was rainbow-colored. Then he smiled and said that it was very wonderful, and he quickly caught another rainbow fish. So the man who was also fishing there said that he thought he was very good at fishing. He smiled and thanked him and said that compared to the elderly, he still had a long way to go. Then suddenly the information window informed him that he had won the title of Fishing Time. Then, suddenly, information about him appeared, including his name, his occupation as a Celestial Gourmet, his title as Fishing Time, and his level 81. And other detailed information about him. X then said that he had already earned the title of Fisherman, which was given to him after fishing for over 100 hours. As he pulled out his fishing rod, he thought that no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't remember how to get to the dead man's beach. But suddenly he saw something that confused him. The fish he pulled out confused not only him, but also the man who was fishing with him, who asked what kind of strange fish it was. The fish had only a skeleton. It was a spiny fish, or rather, Liglian had become a dead man waiting for the king of gourmets. Looking at this fish, X was very happy, because from this point on, this fish must be tied to Liglian, right? Then he took a bite of the fish, because the heavenly taste was supposed to confirm the information about Liglian. So he decided to eat it first before it was too late. Immediately, an information window appeared, informing X that he had entered the hidden location, Beach of the Dead. He immediately found himself in some unfamiliar dark place. Bones and human skulls were lying on the sand. And the sea was electric crimson with lightning in the sky. X looked around and enthusiastically said that it was really here. So, the information window announced that he was able to find a hidden area called the Beach of the Dead. The beach was littered with human skulls and bones, and the crimson-colored sea was raging with high waves. The sky was covered with black, thick clouds that were pierced by lightning. After looking around this hidden place, X was really impressed that he had finally found it. So, this was it, the Beach of the Dead. X found it and it looked really creepy. But as he stood on the sand in front of the sea, he said that it looked quite unusual. Then he suddenly thought that maybe if he went further he could find something and stepped 1 foot into the sea. But after walking only a few steps, X noticed that a black hand appeared from the ground behind him. Skeletons with swords began to emerge from the ground, looking creepy and with red eyes. X looked around and realized that they were skeletons. But then he said, "Doesn't this seem like a bit much for a welcome party?" And indeed, the number of skeletons was increasing every minute. But then suddenly X thought that with his new powers, it was probably a good thing, because he hadn't competed for a long time, so he didn't mind warming up and moving to the next level. The army of skeletons was advancing on X, and he didn't mind and even thought that this was the kind of welcome ceremony called a real party. X smiled and said that he wondered how much experience he would get for defeating the skeletons. X looked at all his opponents and said that he would have no problem killing each of them. Grabbing his sword, X shouted at them to attack him and started the fight. Suddenly, something strange happened. X shouted, "What is this? What is this energy?" He was confused. X was again thrown into some place he didn't understand. It was a very dark room with a black, extinguished candle on the floor. The guy screamed what it was and where he was. Not understanding where his weapons and experience had gone. Suddenly, the candle, which was standing on the floor in a golden candlestick, caught fire. X was very surprised and amazed at what he saw in front of him. A very strange projection of a man appeared in the room from the candle. He had dirty green hair, his eyebrows and eyes were shining with a green glow and there was a red glow around him. He had the really bad appearance of a dead man. He asked in a loud shout who he was. And how dare he behave like this? This man was really very angry. Then X even thought that this was a lot of pressure, and was this even a person? Then suddenly X realized and asked the ghost if he was Legion. Hearing this, the man himself appeared in the room, not his projection, and in a calm voice he confirmed that it was correct. He was indeed Legion. Legion is a loyal subordinate who has been waiting for 300 years for the king of gourmets. He promised to change the world with the gourmet king, but his promise was not kept 300 years ago. Because the promise was not kept, Legion eventually turned his back on the gourmet king. Then Legion said that it was clear that he knew who he was. But why did he come here and try to meet him? What is the reason he wants to meet him? Then X explained to him that it was because he wanted to get the recipe of the king of gourmet food. When he heard what X said, Legion repeated the name, King of Food, with disgust and said that he had not heard that disgusting name for a long time. Then X thought that this was not good. His reaction was colder than he thought, so he thought that the best option would be to convince him with a lie for now. And smiling nervously, he said that he knew why he hated him. But the guy he hadn't seen in 300 years suddenly had a successor. When Legion heard that the king of gourmets had a successor, he got angry and snapped his fingers. Suddenly, the room they were in changed, and X was amazed that Legion could change the place just by snapping his fingers. Then X thought he was a very big man with great powers. If his lies were not consistent, he would be in big trouble, so he had better be honest. The room changed to some kind of mansion. Legion sat down on a chair that looked like a throne and said that if the reason he came here was to meet him. And he paused. Then X addressed Legion in a respectful manner and said that he was saying the right thing. He continued that if he just gave him the recipe, he would do anything. He knows he doesn't like it, but he's really asking for a favor. Legion smiled and asked if he really thought so. He added that he was probably better than the king of gourmets after all, and said that it wouldn't be that hard to give him a recipe. Then X thought that was good and he really should try it, thanked him and added that he was ready to do it right now. Then Legion said that there was something X had to do that he couldn't do with his current level, so X asked him what that could mean. There were so many questions in X's mind. What does that mean? Why did he suddenly say that? Then Legion continued that it was good that he didn't run away just seeing the ingredients, because the recipe he knew used phoenix. X was surprised to hear about the phoenix. The phoenix is one of the existing legendary monsters in Fate. Monsters with the title of legendary have invincible power that cannot be measured by numbers. Then X thought that if it was a phoenix, even the greatest knights in the kingdom could not catch it. To him, it seemed like a crazy thing to try to catch a phoenix with his current level. Then, scratching the back of his head, he said that if that was the case. And he added that it was impossible. He felt like he had come to him for nothing. He said that he was sorry for bothering him, but that he would come to visit him again next time. Then Legion thought that he dared to call himself the successor of the king of gourmets. The king of foodies he knew did not raise any successor. As he watched X walk away, Legion thought maybe it was inevitable, not accidental. The king of gourmets did not change the world. But then he suddenly thought that maybe he could change the world. And he called out to X to wait. Legion said that he had been waiting for the foodie king's successor for as long as he could, and added that it was true that he hated the foodie king, but he thought that X had come here for a reason and that it was fate. So he would look forward to seeing him again. X came back and said that he knows that he is carrying a heavy destiny. That's why he wants to help him, even though he doesn't know what the exact recipe is. Did Legion suddenly realize that X wanted to help him? But X thanked him for his help. So Legion laughed and said that it was good that it was not as hard as he thought. It was a relief for him to pass on his unique skill to him. Then an information window appeared, informing him that he had acquired the unique skill, Death Refusal. With the help of loyal subordinates, you can fulfill their trusts regardless of malice or not. Fulfilling their request can be good for your reputation. Restrictions for those who have the skill of denying death. The reward is Legion's favor. Then X realized that denying death was probably a new quest. Legion said that he had just given him one powerful but practical power. Holding a piece of green stone above his hand that was floating in the air. He said it would be a great help to him, because he was very weak. But it was very sudden for X and he could not understand what was happening. Then Legion said that a tree that is hit by a strong wind will have strong roots, so he should try to adapt to it. After saying that, Legion sent all those pieces of rocks at X, who tried to dodge them. Then an information window informed X that an NPC had attacked him. Then the shocked X thought that he would die from one such attack. Just to get one skill. How strong was he? Suddenly, a new information window appeared again, informing him that the unique skill, Death Refusal, had been activated. 2 more information windows informed him that he had just escaped death and that he had been resurrected as if he were not alive. X did not understand what was happening. He was confused, his body was changing. So, death denial: when a player dies, they are resurrected like non-dead lower-level soldiers. The stats are redistributed to match the conditions of the lower-level undead soldiers. If you don't die due to the Death Refusal skill, you will be revived at your full body and condition before death. But if you die, you will be sentenced to death. The higher the level, the lower the chance of being resurrected. X's rank is the lowest soldier of the undead. X couldn't realize that he was actually still alive. This meant that after being resurrected, he could become undead. He didn't think that would happen. Then he said that appearance was important to him and asked Legion what information windows said about the statistics being distributed, and if it was true. Then he was shocked. It was distributed. He thought it would be a promotion. In the ranks of the undead soldiers, his name was listed as X, his title was Fisherman for Time, level 90, fame 440. Mana, intelligence, and stamina were at 0. Then he asked how strong he was when he became a lower-ranked undead soldier. Then Legion laughed and said that X looked better than him. X also laughed and thanked him. Then, opening the blue portal, Legion said that denying death is more practical and powerful than anything else. Therefore, he must use this power to bring the egg out of the nets. X told him that he understood. The portal opened into the dead forest, the place where the king of the dead and Legion hid important eggs to protect them from criminals. When X entered the portal, an information window appeared, informing him that he was entering a hidden area of the forest of the dead. Then he looked around and said he needed to find the nest with the egg. As he walked along the path, he thought he came here to look for it because he had been told to do so. Were these eggs important ingredients for the recipe? Then suddenly he saw a red egg in the trunk of a tree that was illuminated by a light. He was happy to have found it. Was it not easy to find? The egg was in the nest of the tree trunk and was wrapped in branches. At first, X thought it looked different. But suddenly it started to crack. X realized that the egg was breaking. But if it broke, what should he tell Legion? Something strange started to come out of the egg. It was red in color with horns and wings like a dragon. Then X was confused. He realized that it was something that was in the egg hatching and thought, should he take responsibility for it? But suddenly, behind the confused X, someone in a black cloak with a hood and a scythe appeared. He swung to hit the boy. But X noticed it in time and was shocked to realize that there was an ambush. Then X pulled out a shield from his inventory and covered himself from the intruder and thought, is this a competition? A duel with such high-ranking monsters would not be easy. As he repelled the attacks, X thought that Legion, that jerk, how could he do this to him? The creature that hatched from that egg suddenly appeared next to X and howled, then X didn't realize what it was doing. When the stranger saw and heard the creature, he trembled. The stranger got scared and ran away, leaving X confused. Then the boy said that this stranger just heard the voice of the creature and ran away. That was strange. Meanwhile, in Legion, he had been cursed for 300 years and was only waiting for the king of gourmets. But it was okay if the man who became his successor came. Sitting on the throne, he said that he would still help him, but not through the king of foodies. Now he doesn't have to wait for him to just change the world. If this guy can make his dream come true, that will be enough for him. Suddenly, he was brought out of his thoughts by the portal he had just opened, and X came out of it with a creature and told him that he had brought what he had asked for. But then X said that the egg had hatched there. What should they do now? Legion said he gave him a quest with all the possibilities and asked if he liked it. Then the information window immediately informed X that he had successfully completed the quest. Then holding the creature that was sitting on X's hand, he said that it was very cute and he would not forget its kindness. He had brought this creature here just to save it, so he would give it something, because he had allowed it. Then Legion told him that it was a reward for the quest he had completed and added that he should just accept it carefully. Then the creature made a cute sound. Then an information box appeared, explaining that the creature that hatched was a dragon and asking if he would like to have it as a pet. When X realized that it was a dragon, he was amazed and thanked Legion for this errand in which he received a dragon as a reward. Then the young man said that now he could use this dragon and make his journey easier. It was so sweet. The dragon must have liked the idea of traveling together, so he began to caress the boy. Then X said that they would work together and called him Yun Jiang, which the animal liked very much. Then Leg Lion smiled and repeated the name Yun Jiang. He said that X had really named him badly. And he added that he should take care, the successor to the king of foodies. Then two different-sized purple rings appeared behind Legion, and red lightning came out of his hand, which he raised. But X shouted at him to wait a minute. X also shouted that he wanted to ask him many things. He shouted even louder that he could do whatever he wanted. But suddenly X woke up to a notification. It was an information box alerting him that the Gourmet King Recipe Legion quest was complete. X exhaled a sigh of relief. It wasn't a dream, he had completed the quest after all. Sitting on the bed and looking at the information window, he thought, maybe he became the first owner of a dragon in Fate? If so, it's cool. Suddenly, another notification came, Dear X, a note from Fate has arrived. Looking at the envelope, he thought, what could it be? When he opened the notification, he was very surprised. The notification contained the following information: Congratulations. You have been selected as a Fate Meiji streamer. X couldn't believe his eyes that he had become a Fate streamer. Meanwhile, X logged out of his account in the game. He got out of bed and said that he had been lying in bed for more than 2 days and his body was in pain. Then he said that he still got the equipment for the relic class and a chance to become a streamer. So he smiled and said that it was a blissful agony for him. And he added that he would conduct a thorough investigation into the fate of streamers. He turned on his computer and began his investigation. He opened several pages that talked about Destiny streamers. After reading them, he concluded that no matter what kind of broadcast he would do, he would earn a fixed monthly fee just for the conversations themselves. Real-time donations with significant incentives for the number of viewers. In addition, it guarantees 100% additional advertising revenue. In other words, even if you just get a fixed monthly salary while talking on streams. Then X joyfully shouted that there would be no more fried chicken in the future. He thought, is there a reason why someone wouldn't want to do this? Let's get rid of the chicken restaurant and play games. He has to make money playing games. Then he thought that for the broadcast, he would start by hiding his profession and focus on the cooking show, the one he was most confident in. The name would be Monstrous Mukbang Show X. So he was going to get 100 viewers step by step. Then he decided to look at the rating of previous streams. The War Machine Guild was in first place, the Surfer Guild was in second place, the Jijix Guild was in third place, the Kinju Guild was in fourth place, 21EN was in fifth place, the Cream Guild was in sixth place, and Ryan TV was in seventh place. X was only on 67th place. When he saw this, he said that he expected it. Then thinking about it, he said that it was obvious, but there was a big difference compared to the War Machine Guild who were in first place. First, he needed to slowly level up by collecting mukbang ingredients. He said with a sigh that he had been playing games for several days, but hadn't slept, so his eyes were closing by themselves and he started yawning. Then he decided that he needed to take a break first, and then slowly he would start again. He might fall if he pushed himself too hard. So, the final show of the Fate streaming began. The host walked out on the colorful stage in front of the audience with Fate written in big letters behind him and started by greeting the audience. He greeted everyone and said that everyone had been waiting for this for a long time. Finally, the final of Kaimus streaming began. He went on to announce the first War Machine Guild leader in the stream, and invited the audience to watch Kaimus' conquest of the Dark Leaken Slope right now. The ruins of the Dark Leaken Slope appeared on the big screen behind the host. Soldiers with spears stood in front of the ruins, and a man with a sword stood on a rise opposite them, with 2 other people standing next to him. Then the man with the sword said that everyone should not worry and continue as they usually do. All the soldiers shouted, "Yes," in one voice. Then the leader of the war machines said that they had tens of millions of viewers behind them, those who would help prove their strength together. And he added that this was level 350, the Dark Leaken Slope. Another man standing next to the leader said that they were going to defeat everyone and prove themselves, and added that everyone should get ready for the battle. The Dark Leaken Slope of Conquest is a monster strong enough to destroy a small kingdom in the past. Even the best guilds are now hesitant to take on this difficult quest. This monster was very stout with a horn on its head and red shiny eyes, sharp teeth and powerful arms. Now the real battle would begin. The audience watching this show was amazed at the scale of this team. X was watching the show at his job at a restaurant. Then the host asked the question that everyone was interested in: could the War Machine Guild succeed in this quest? So the War Machine Guild started the battle, the leader shouted, "Charge," and all the warriors rushed at the monster. The warriors were advancing, there were many people and the monster was not alone, there were 3 of them. The warriors of the War Machine Guild were ruthless and the monster was not going to let them live. The next day in the Desert of Oblivion. X was in the Desert of Oblivion. He came here without planning it and wondered if he would find the right ingredients for mukbang. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a red scorpion crawling across the hot sand, and he thought that it might be a baby desert scorpion. If so, it means that desert scorpions are being introduced here. X then said that at this level, he could definitely consider this as mukbang material and added that he was choosing desert scorpions. X then took out his sword and said that now no more complications, he would try it first and then decide. So he rushed at the scorpion very quickly. With just one swing of his sword, he killed the scorpion. Holding the scorpion's head, he enthusiastically said that he needed to find a place somewhere and try to cook it there. While cooking the scorpion, X thought that, contrary to its appearance, it was probably very tasty. After cooking the scorpion, X looked at the dish and thought that he should first get in the mood to try it. But then he decided to try the heavenly cuisine. Then he made a wave of his hand and summoned his unique divine cooking skill. A golden orb shone in his hands, which he directed at the dish made from the desert scorpion. The scorpion, which had previously been red, changed its color to golden yellow. After breaking off a piece of the scorpion, X tasted it. An information window immediately appeared, informing him that the divine taste had revealed a hidden flavor in the special roasted body of the scorpion. Another information window informed him to ignore the heat and stand in the desert for 60 minutes. Tasting the scorpion meat, X thought it was much tastier than he expected. Another information window appeared, informing him that his desert agility had increased by 30 points for 60 minutes. Holding another piece of scorpion meat in his hands, X thought that he wondered if Yonyang would like it too. And should he try to give the dragon a snack too? Then he shouted, "Summon," and a purple portal appeared in the sand. Then a red dragon appeared and made a cute, cackle, sound. He immediately flew to X, who laughed and said that he had even forgotten about him for a moment. He gave a piece of scorpion to the dragon that was sitting on his shoulder and said that it was a fried scorpion that he had cooked and he hoped to have it today. He added that they should eat it and hunt together to get the ingredients for mukbang. But suddenly something strange happened, and X's foot fell into the sand. Falling down, X shouted, "Earth," and the dragon was also surprised. The ground on which X was standing began to fall apart, so he began to fall under it. X screamed, completely falling under the ground, he was flying somewhere. But suddenly an information window appeared, informing him that this was a desert scorpion trap. X fell into the pit with a thud, and it was dark, and a column of dust rose after the fall, but the red eyes of the scorpions were still visible, shining in the dark. They surrounded X from all sides, and he pulled his sword out of his inventory. He shouted in annoyance, because being trapped by scorpions in the desert is very annoying. And he motioned for them all to come over, because today he was going to level up significantly. The scorpion that was coming up behind X raised its tail to wound the enemy. But the scorpion managed to hit X right in the back, spitting out blood and shouting that they were cowards for attacking from behind. Then X noticed that his feet were sinking very deep into the ground and it was very difficult for him to move. It was probably the mud. Then he thought that if his feet were tied up like that, it would be hard for him to dodge. Then an information window appeared, warning X that he was bleeding openly. X was shocked and couldn't understand that this bleeding was due to the attack from the back. Seeing that X was in a bad way, the dragon, Yunjian, decided to take matters into his own hands, so he screamed and headed straight for the scorpion. Seeing how fearlessly Yunjian picked up the scorpion by its tail, X called out to him and told him that they had to get out of here first. The dragon wouldn't let go of the scorpion, so X shouted at him to think. Suddenly, X noticed another scorpion coming in from behind. Then he thought it was another surprise attack from behind. Then, cutting the scorpion in half with his sword, X said that although his legs were tied and it was difficult to move, he could still move his upper body, and he noticed that they were still quite intelligent creatures. But he cannot take them lightly. The information window appeared again, informing X that the bleeding effect was penalized by anemia. Some black, incomprehensible substance came out of X's mouth, and he screamed that it had even caused him to become anemic. X fell down on one knee and said that everything had gone from bad to worse, and even with the rejection of death, he could not solve the current situation. Then he realized that he was gradually losing his stamina and he had no time for this. So he gathered all his strength and stood up. He grabbed his sword and said that at such moments he must remain calm, so he tried to calm down. Then he looked at the scorpions that surrounded him and thought that it was okay if it was just one of them, he could handle it, but he couldn't handle all of them at once. Then suddenly X thought that he could use only one skill in this situation. The dragon was very concerned about the boy's condition. Then X told him not to worry, because he would never die so easily. Already exhausted from bleeding, X watched the scorpions gather around him, thinking that if he could fight them one by one, he could handle it, but if they attacked him at once, he would not succeed. The dragon was watching and worried about the boy. Then X said that he could only use one skill in this situation. He smiled and told young Jiun not to worry, because he would never let himself be killed so easily. Suddenly, one of the scorpions jumped up to stab X in the back. Noticing the sneak attack from behind again, X is angry, because they are trying to hit him from behind again. But it was not the first time they attacked him from behind, so with one swing of his sword, X again cut the scorpion in half. He would not fall for it again. Then X summarized that the more time he loses, the less profitable it becomes because of the bleeding. Looking at the dragon, X thought that he must be exhausted too, because he had also fought scorpions. X did not know how to get out of this situation. Looking back at young Jiun, X suddenly realized something. He didn't know if what he was thinking would work, but it certainly made sense and he had to think about it. He remembered that the first time Yonghyun had cried, it had scared even a top-level monster into running away. Why hadn't he thought of that before, when X called out to Yonghyun? The dragon looked at X as if to ask what he wanted. Then he said that he had to do something. Then Yonghyun started to run faster. He flew between the scorpions and flew up over the hole they had fallen through. Purple and white lines appeared between the scorpions, and the dragon cried loudly. After that, an information window appeared, informing him that the desert scorpions had lost consciousness. Seeing that the scorpions had lost consciousness, X said that he expected it, it worked. X then said that Yongkyung did a good job. X said that as long as the scorpions were unconscious, he would kill them all in one blow. He pulled his feet off the mud he was standing in and stood in a bear pose. In a split second, all the scorpions were struck by X and exhaled. Then X looked at the black mud he was standing in and thought that he must have gotten stuck there and that's why his feet were stuck. Happy Yunjiun flew over to the boy, who took him in his arms and thanked him, because without him he would not have been able to survive. So X smiled and told the dragon that now they had to get out of this annoying place. Then X gathered all his strength and jumped out of the pit. He landed a few meters away from it, along with Yunjian. An information window immediately appeared, informing him that he had escaped from the desert scorpion's trap. Another information window appeared a few seconds later, informing him that the reward for escaping the desert scorpion trap had been granted. After reading this, X was surprised to see what kind of bounty for escaping the trap it was talking about. The reward for escape was a knight's gauntlet of an ancient kingdom. This relic of an ancient kingdom that was destroyed has a decent characteristic even after a lot of time has passed. The level limit is 100, the strength limit is 300. Defense 100 and strength 15. Special effects may appear if worn with other knightly relics of the ancient kingdom, hidden effects are unlocked. X couldn't believe his eyes, what he was about to see was amazing. The ancient relic set not only gives powerful stats compared to items of the same level, but it also gives special effects. This relic set is stronger than a unique set of the same level. The ancient relic set sets the statistic of the effect activation to 2x. This is an item that gives amazing stats. But users who wore the full set of higher tier relics were among the few of the tens of millions of Fate users. Then X laughed and picked up the dragon and said, "Isn't this really this relic? Why the hell did it fall out here?" Then he put on this relic and said that he would try to wear it with joy and added that it wore well. Then he suddenly thought that the rest of the items in this set must have fallen out in this desert as well. So he has to find the rest of the equipment. Then he looked around and decided to keep walking, calling out to Yonyang. It was already dark in the desert, even the dust had risen and the horizon was hardly visible. The next day, X was already fully dressed in the kit he needed. So the hunt for the remains of ancient relics in the sandy desert was not in vain. Standing fully dressed in the set of ancient relics, X thought that the shape was a bit strange. He thought it looked a little bad on the outside, but it was the best choice for this level. Then he thought that Yun Jiang had worked hard, so he needed to be given a rest and now needed to gather food materials. X raised his sword and said that a few hundred desert scorpions, that will be very quick for him now, and headed further across the desert. After an hour of hunting in the sandy desert, X collected 320 scorpion bodies and 470 legs. Now he has no shortage of food ingredients for mukbang. So now he can start his broadcast. An information window popped up saying that the headgear was not equipped. X was about to start broadcasting, but he didn't know what to press. This was his first broadcast, what should he choose? What were the stream options? Another information window appeared, asking him to set the name of the broadcast. When he learned that he had to choose the name of the broadcast, he thought about it, because he had never thought about it. So since it's a show where he eats monsters, how about the terrible Mukbang X show? After choosing the name, we could start broadcasting. A start button appeared on the information window, and X clicked on it. The next information window informed him that the terrible Mukbang X show was now streaming. The stream started so quickly that X was even scared that it happened so quickly. He greeted everyone and introduced himself, saying that this was his first broadcast, so he asked them to be nice to him and smiled. He already had 3 viewers and 3 comments on his broadcast. The first commenter asked what X wanted. The second said it was boring, and the third said what kind of food show was he going to do on Fate and laughed. X thought that the commentators were very cold to him, and that's exactly what he expected from them. But he will just do his thing and not give in to all the little things. He went on to broadcast his show right in the middle of the sandy desert. He goes on to say that today he's going to do a mukbang show. It's called the Mukbang Show, Horrible Monsters. One of the comments asked monstrous and laughed, and another asked what he was going to eat now. Then X decided to answer the question, what exactly will he eat? He said they could see lots of them on the desert map. He was going to use a desert scorpion for the mukbang show. Then X showed the audience a desert scorpion that had already been killed. For new comments appeared, the first commenter was simply amazed, the next asked to see what it looked like, another asked if he was going to eat it, and the fourth said that it was probably just to attract attention inside. X responded to the comments by pulling out the scorpion legs. To the comment about the attention, he asked them not to worry, because of course scrutiny is the rule. The comments reappeared. The first commenter asked if he was really going to eat it raw and laughed, the next one said it was poisonous and he would die if he ate it. And the third one said it was really gross and laughed. The commentators were just laughing at what X was doing. They didn't take him seriously at all. Then X laughed and replied that of course he should eat it raw so that it would be a great mukbang show, and started eating the raw scorpion leg. New comments were not long in coming, and one of the comments even spat, another asked him to stop and laughed, and the third asked if he was really eating it. Chewing on the raw meat of the sand scorpion, X thought that it was not even bad. It might be the celestial gourmet trade at work, but it tasted like crab to him. Then he suggested, how about that, not an attention seeker, right? Again, comments appeared, but of a completely different nature. The first comment agreed and said that he recognized it, the next comment said that the terrible food show was approved, and the last comment said that it was great and they approved it. Then X said he thought he had already checked it out, he needed to use the scorpion's body for cooking, so he would eat the rest of the legs. And he started to eat more. The comments came back. The first comment was that they respected him, the next one asked if he could eat other monsters. The third said he had never seen anything like it. Then an information box appeared, announcing that X's horrific mukbang show had reached 500 viewers. Information notifications with the number of viewers of the terrible mukbang show appeared one after another. At first it was 1,000, then 5,000, and then the number exceeded 10,000. When X saw the number of viewers who were on his show, he was amazed. After all, 10,000 viewers like his show. But suddenly, the next information window appeared, informing him that his viewers were giving him gold. X was amazed. Viewers are giving him gold, and even gold gifts that have the same monetary value. Next, an information window appeared, informing him that the one deal master was giving him 5 gold pieces. The next information window informed him that the Angel of Yanji gave him 7 gold. Comments praising X's show appeared one after another, while others asked him to keep eating. X thought there was no end to the golden gifts. If he does it well, he doesn't just suck the honey, he eats it. He then bowed to the audience and sincerely thanked them for their gifts and said he would repay them with the best broadcast ever. His name was chanted in the comments. And X thought that was a very good response. Then X said that he felt that to redeem the support given to him by the viewers, he would eat the still raw body of a scorpion. The audience was amazed that he was going to eat the body as well, and said that he was very determined and they did not regret giving him the gold. So X grabbed the scorpion's body and showed it to the audience. And he thought that now he was starting the real game. So, meanwhile, in the company's fate development office, a guy was watching a show of a war machine guild fighting a monster. He thought that it was very interesting to watch this fight, and it was not surprising, because it was the most anticipated streaming by users. Then he suddenly noticed some other employees watching something on the computer and laughing, so he thought that there hadn't been a single funny scene in the war machine broadcast yet. What could they be laughing at? Then the guy got up to go see what they were laughing at, and the man who was sitting at the computer laughing was amazed that the person who was broadcasting was going to eat something strange. Then the surprised man came closer to the laughing people and looked at the screen. When he saw the broadcast of the desert scorpion being eaten on the computer screen, he thought, is this mukbang? When the man who was sitting at the computer noticed him, he told him that the military machines were fighting an amazing battle, and he was watching this instead. What kind of strange show is this? Then the man looked at the computer screen and said that a fierce battle of war machines is fun, but watching this guy do it is also fun. Then the guy looked at the broadcast and said that he doubted that even 100 people would watch it, because mukbang is just mukbang. Then the man laughed and said that he didn't know what he was talking about, because this guy was being watched by more than 100,000 viewers right now. The guy was surprised by what he heard, because he thought that almost no one was interested in this broadcast. He was incredibly impressed. how can 100,000 people watch this? Then the man thought about it and said that yes, it is 100,000 viewers now, but the number of viewers is growing at a very fast rate, and added that the strongest ruler of Lin Online who had a pitiful ending comes back like that. People really like such stories. Then the guy was surprised looking at the guy on the monitor. He thought that if they are talking about Lin Online, are they really talking about X from Lin Online? Then the guy thought, if X was involved in various war machine guilds in Lin Online, then he must have attracted a lot of troubles from this guild now. Then he asked the man how many viewers War Machines had now, about 8 million. And the guy replied that they currently have 8.3 million viewers. But it seems that soon it will be 9 million. Then the man smiled and said that he was not sure that their broadcast would be able to reach 9 million. Perhaps the star of the first stream is not the War Machines, but X. Meanwhile, in the Desert of Oblivion, X's broadcast was a success. So when the information window appeared and informed him that Suri Ma Suri had sent him another 10 gold pieces, he was very happy. Suddenly, the number of viewers on the mukbang stream reached 500,000. Then X suddenly realized that he was probably third in the ranking just because of this gold alone. The gold that viewers were sending him was more than he could earn in a month of work. But anyway, everything was going according to plan. He was making money on streaming and bringing the retirement of military machines closer. But suddenly more sand dust started to appear in the desert. X coughed and wondered why there was so much sandstorm when he was making mukbang, or if it was really a sandstorm starting, because the food would get dusty. The column of sand dust kept getting bigger and higher. X coughed up even more, so it would be very difficult for him to continue broadcasting. Then he smiled at the viewers and apologized for this, because it is a desert and there is always a very strong wind. The commentators asked what was behind him and asked him to look behind him because there was something there. When he read the message that there was someone behind him, he didn't realize what the thing was. Something of incredibly large size was coming up behind X. It was the reason for this sandstorm. X turned around and couldn't figure out what it was, and then he suddenly thought that maybe it was attracted by the smell of food. It was an incredibly huge sand giant, and X looked at it and thought that he did not expect to see it here. New comments had already appeared, some asking him to run away, others asking what would happen to the mukbang, and others waiting for it. X grabbed his sword and put on his helmet. An information window appeared saying that the helmet was on. He then addressed the audience to apologize and said he would complete the mukbang next time. The commentators disagreed and said that the mukbang was fun and they didn't want to leave, and asked him to continue. He gathered himself and said that instead he would settle the score with this giant who had ruined his broadcast. The giant started laughing, and X thought it would be good to show others something other than mukbang, so he would turn this crisis into an opportunity. Then X thought that if he fought with all his might and felt like he was losing, he could just end his broadcast. Then he would win the viewers' sympathy and make his competitors satisfied. Then X accelerated to get closer to the giant. X flew into the air to wound the giant with his sword, and the giant tried to catch X with his hand. But the giant failed to grab the boy, so X was able to do what he had planned. He stabbed the giant with his sword. Then he swung again and hit the giant right on the head and said that he was worth his size. But then he coughed because the sandstorm made it hard to get close to him. The giant was incredibly angry, his eyes sparkling with golden stones, a sandstorm raging everywhere and golden sparks flying. Then he thought that he needed a weapon that could hit the giant from afar, and a bow appeared in his hand. Aiming the arrow at the giant, he thought that he needed to use a ranged attack. One by one, the arrows began to tear the giant into the sand with a blue electric glow, and the attacks increased one by one. The giant could not resist it. After making a few more strikes, X landed and thought that this should have transferred some damage to him. Behind X, the giant's eyes shone in the pitch-black sandstorm. He sent a blow with all his might toward X. But in time X summoned the shield of Kalshmar, which protected him from the giant's attack. X with all his strength held the giant's blow and thought that the shield was raised, but there was damage. Jumping to another place, X said that this was some ridiculous attack force. Then he gritted his teeth and gathered all the strength he had. He said that if he could use such power, it meant that he hadn't done any damage with that attack. Looking at the giant towering over this desert through the sandstorm, X thought maybe he would be the strongest opponent he had ever met. Perhaps he would even have to use both the bear's posture and Yongyan's. Then, grabbing his sword again, he thought that he would first try to face him with his full power. So he gathered himself to face the giant and thought that he was also confident in his strength. He continued to attack him until he fell down and struck him again. Swinging his sword around, blue lightning sparkled around X, he gathered all his power. Gathering all his strength, X was about to deliver another merciless blow and shouted that he would see who would fall first. The crushing blow hit the new giant on the head. Blue lightning flew in all directions. The giant was incredibly angry, and he was going to crush X with his fist. The giant hit X with his fist and he flew away. Before X could react, the giant quickly got to him. He pushed X into the sand with his fist, and he could only cough. Coughing, X shouted that he too thought he was strong enough, but the giant's strength pushed him away. The giant picked up X and threw him into the desert, and he thought that in fate one really has to be restrained. From the giant's strong blow, X buried himself deep in the sand. Sand dust rose up all around him. X peeked out of the sand a little. The comments exploded, they did not believe what they were seeing, asked him to get up, said they would give him gold, but he had to get up. A new information window appeared, saying that X had died, so the broadcast ended. In the comments, people exploded, they did not believe that he had died and that the broadcast was over. Then suddenly another information window appeared, announcing that the death denial was activated. The next information window announced his resurrection and a white light shone around him. X raised his arm and tried to stand up. He began to stretch his body. Then suddenly X thought he understood the reason why he could not do any damage. The sandstorm that surrounds the giant reduces the attack to 0. Then X grabbed his sword and thought that if he could hit its body he had a chance. X didn't look good, his eyes were shining and he ordered his helmet to turn off. An information window appeared, confirming that the helmet had been removed. Without his helmet, X swung his sword and shouted that the giant should be ready now. While the fight was going on, it was already dark outside and the desert was pitch black. The giant tried to hit X again. But he only hit the ground, and pieces of dry earth flew in different directions with X. X quickly got up and ran to the other side of the attack and thought that fortunately the giant's movements were quite slow. But he could not see the attack clearly because of the sandstorm. The giant was advancing in the darkness and despite the fact that it was hard to see and its shiny eyes could be seen from far away. X wondered where he should aim, it was just his giant body. Suddenly, X thought that the weather conditions in the world of destiny are now typhoons and heavy rains, but obviously this will change with time. So the sandstorm that was protecting him would not last long. He thought that if he left the notification settings for weather changes, it would change. An information window appeared, informing him that the sandstorm notification setting was complete. Seeing this message, X thought he should just wait for his time to fight back. The giant swung his fist again. Again, missing X, he struck the ground and pieces of earth flew off in all directions. The giant kept punching his fists to catch X. The giant's blows left large craters and pieces of earth flying in all directions. X's eyes lit up and he decided that he would be done with him quickly. The giant did not stop punching the ground, and X deftly moved between the pieces of earth that flew off after the blows to get to the place where he could finish him off. 2 hours later, X received a news report that the sandstorm in the desert area had been lifted. The sandstorm had disappeared near the giant. But he wanted to strike again. X noticed that the sandstorm had disappeared and went on the attack. Now X was sure he could destroy the giant. X accelerated and jumped up to hit his opponent from above. X was hanging in the air, and the giant was angry because this fight was not over. He couldn't just take this guy down. His eyes were shining with blue light and he seemed to be radiating blue light, he was ready to win. X asked the giant how it was, because the storm had descended and he had no protective barrier. The giant was very furious. This battle had been going on for what seemed like forever. X shouted, "Bear pose," and the blue glow that was around him turned red. With incredible speed, X was near the giant. He swung his sword and struck a powerful victorious blow. The giant's head was cut off. This battle had to end. But X was unstoppable. He had waited too long for this moment and was going to do everything possible to defeat the giant. Punch after punch, he cut the giant into different pieces. His body was just completely cut up. X landed a few meters away from the giant, who simply disintegrated before his eyes, pieces of his body flying to the ground. The giant's head flew to the ground and he screamed a fierce cry, but there was nothing to bring back. He was defeated. Looking back as the giant crumbled before his eyes, X said that he had messed up his broadcast. An information window appeared, informing X that he had become the first person in the world of Destiny to defeat the guardian of an ancient kingdom. He was amazed that he was the first person to defeat him. But an information window appeared, informing him that he had risen to a new level. Another information window appeared, informing him that he had been awarded the title of Explorer of the Ancient Kingdom. The next information window informed him that his reputation had increased by 500. X thought that there was very little information about the Ancient Kingdom since it was such a rare event, so he decided to check the title first. So, the researcher of the ancient realm gets protection from the Rim of Destruction. After rereading the information, X was surprised that it didn't provide him with any additional statistics. But he didn't know what the Fringe of Destruction was, what it meant. He had to check his inventory and he had to eat something. Then he saw the quest and wondered if this was all he got for all his efforts. The quest note is from the Guardian of the Ancient Kingdom. It is written in the ancient language of the Ancient Kingdom. The reason for the destruction can be recorded by interpreting the special effects. The quest has begun. X thought that if he could complete this quest, he would find out what the annihilation border is, so he decided to open this quest. An information window appeared asking if he was sure he wanted to open the notes. He said he wanted to open it and got an ancient book. It was old and shabby and had a symbol on the flyleaf. There was new information. But it was completely incomprehensible to him and he did not know what it meant. So, looking at the notebook, he thought that the next quest would probably be an interpretation of this text, so he needed to find it. Suddenly X remembered the great sage Cyrus. This is a man who is called a master of knowledge. Even the king of gourmets also learned a lot after meeting him in the past. Then he thought that if he could find Cyrus, he would definitely get the recipe of the king of gourmets, because he was connected to him. So, standing in the middle of the desert, X thought about where he could meet him. He is sure that there are a lot of rumors about Cyrus now, and to meet him he just needs to complete a quest. An information window appeared about X. His profession is a low-level undead warrior. His rank is Explorer of the Ancient Kingdom, level 115. The next information window was about a pet. The name is Yong Jayun, the race is Dragon, the energy is 79%, the level is 14. After looking at the information about Yong Hyun, the boy laughed, because the dragon's level was higher than his. Yong Hyun is very strong. X headed out into the desert and said that no matter how far he had to look for him, he would find a clue. Meanwhile, in the office of the developers of the game Fate. Something you see on the screen, a guy shouted that it couldn't be. As the largest number of viewers of X was 5,328,000. While the War Machines had 5,309,000 viewers, and just before the stream ended, X defeated the War Machines Guild in just 2 minutes. He was amazed, because he was sure that X's mukbang show would get no more than 100 viewers. So looking at this, he thought, I'm sure this is going to be a big problem. He was sure that the War Machine Guild already knew about this, so what would their reaction be? Meanwhile, in the room of the War Machine Guild, the Destiny news began. The host greeted the audience and said that recent streamers who had made a bright debut had made headlines. Behind him was a streaming rating. The leader of the War Machine Guild was watching the Fate news. The host said that right now there was a lot of Destiny buzz from a video they made and added that the streamer who made the most headlines was Kaimus from War Machines. The host went on to say that Kaimus was the first in fate to succeed at level 300 in a monster raid, but there is someone who also reached the highest level like Kaimus is X. Hearing X's name, the leader said to turn off the news. Standing in the middle of his office, the leader said that X was probably still as good as he was in the past. Another man who was standing behind the leader said that this might not be the X they know. Then the leader smiled and said that it was unusual to have such skills and added that they had the same name and skill, but it must be different. With a strange smile, he said that even if he came back, there was no way he could beat them alone, they were number one. Then he told them to just think about this guild and not think about anything else. Then the man behind the leader agreed with him. In addition to the two men, there was a girl in the room and she looked a little sad. She thought about the reason for X's return. She tilted her head and thought, he probably wants to take revenge on them. Meanwhile, it was getting dark outside and X was in an ancient forest looking for clues. As he walked through the forest, X thought that it must be because there were so many trees that it was so dark, but according to the map, the vegetation in the forest was very dense. Suddenly, he heard strange sounds in front of him, some kind of animal. He was excited because he saw a deer and thought that since this animal looked like a deer, it must be delicious. The deer was tall and had winged horns, its eyes glowed red, and it was blowing steam from its nose. An information window appeared, informing me that the deer of the old forest was using pressure. The deer rushed toward X with all its speed. But X had his sword out to meet the deer and was ready to kill it. Then he suddenly ran away and could not understand whether it was magic. He thought that animals can probably use magic and said that the deer must have chosen to fight him. Later, X was standing in front of the dead deer, and there was a glow around them. He said that it had happened so easily, it was really just ordinary meat, and he really shouldn't have expected anything more. He decided to look at the characteristics of the meat of this deer. So, the deer mutation is deer meat from a deer that lives only in the old forest. It preserves the spirit of the old forest, adds 50% energy, and has special effects such that eating raw meat does not cause harm. So he decided to try the divine cooking skill with this meat. The divine taste buds absorbed the mutated deer meat. So X wished himself a good meal and tasted the meat. Immediately, an information window appeared, informing him that the heavenly taste had found a hidden flavor in the deer of the ancient forest. Information windows appeared one after another, one saying that his body had accepted the energy of the ancient forest. Another said that his agility doubled when he was in the ancient forest, and his intelligence increased by 100 points. The last window said that he could now interact with nature. X was amazed that he had the ability to interact with nature, which meant he could hear the grass. Suddenly he felt someone watching him from behind and turned around. Behind him was a tree with many eyes, which said that he was disturbing the order in the forest. X was surprised and could not understand what it was. From all sides he could hear that someone needed his help. He was surprised that he could really hear it. Standing in front of a strange tree with eyes on its trunk, X was asked if he understood everything so far. Then X said that evil energy had entered this ancient forest and he needed to remove this energy so that all the inhabitants of this forest could keep their sanity. Then he heard the unfamiliar voice again, saying that he understood everything. The mysterious voice said that the ancient forest is the heart. This is the place where all the creatures of the ancient forest draw their energy. X listened carefully. The voice continued that a mysterious evil spirit was approaching the forest. And it would cause them terrible pain. X smilingly said that if they would give it to him, he would deal with the evil spirit and thought that he just needed to kill the evil spirit in the ancient forest. So he thought that maybe it was a simple quest to catch a particular monster or just to eliminate the cause. So it was not difficult for him and he could help this forest. Then the tree said that before that, it had one more thing to deal with. X asked what the tree wanted to tell him. So the tree explained that there are children in the forest. And the evil is bothering the children, so can he save the children first? After all, they are suffering from evil forces. An information window appeared with a quest to save the children of the forest. The evil energy that began to spread in the heart of the ancient forest and the evil energy of each of the monsters. Monsters dominated the forest and destroyed everything. And other creatures could only look at this with sadness. However, if it is him, he will be able to expel his energy and restore in the ancient forest. Prerequisite: those who can communicate with the creatures of the ancient forest. Reward: kinship with the creatures of the ancient forest. Reading the information about the quest, X thought it was very good. To ward off evil energy he must go to the center of the ancient energy. They must really believe him to do the job. And he, in turn, will do his best to help the children of the forest. When you read the quest information again, was X surprised to see, killed everyone? He was surprised and felt a little guilty, because not long before that he had cooked and eaten many animals in the forest. He didn't think it would harm the forest. Then the tree said that eating and being eaten was a part of nature and it didn't want to blame him, but hoped that he was not a greedy person and would not do it again. X was embarrassed, so he said that he hadn't really eaten very much. Then scratching the back of his head, he said that anyway, he only needed to save them. So he would do it without any problems. Looking at the quest, X thought about the evil energy from which he had to save the ancient forest. So when he accepted the quest, he thought that he would only have to deal with 1 or 2 people who were spreading this evil energy. So X went to the heart of the forest in search of the evil energy. As he walked, he thought that if the monsters were ruled by an evil spirit, there must be 1 or 2 creatures who were acting crazy. Then he could immediately identify and deal with them. Suddenly he heard unfamiliar sounds in the bushes in front of him and saw that it was just a little lamb. When he saw it, he started salivating. But he brushed it off and said that he just had to wait and moved on. After all, he had more important things to do and he had promised not to kill here. As he walked, the trees told him how much further he had to go, and he still had a little bit more to go. Suddenly he saw something very strange in front of him, so he was surprised. He did not expect this. So, he saw something strange in front of him. One strange fox was attacking another fox. The strange fox had dark fur, red eyes, and a horn on its forehead. It was because it was unusual for a fox to show its teeth and attack its own kind. The red fox growled at the other fox, because the other fox was obviously going to attack her. So she had to be ready to attack. The dark fox was also growling, and X thought that just by looking at it he could tell that it was possessed by an evil spirit. The fox was furiously about to attack the other. There was nothing holding it back. Examining it more closely, X noticed that other creatures emit green light, but this one was giving off black light. It was definitely not ordinary. Indeed, the dark fox was giving off black light, and its eyes were glowing red. It looked nothing like an ordinary fox, and X thought it looked ominous. So X took his sword and shield and said he had no choice but to catch it. Then the tree said that one day it would not allow him to do so. Then X thought he was sure it would backfire on him. But he had to destroy this ferocious fox that was clearly driven by evil. As X stood there pondering the tree's words, the dark fox killed the redhead. It was a quick sacrifice for the dark fox hovering over her. Then X thought that he must have gotten permission and quickly headed toward the dark fox. He said he would do it right now. But the fox noticed his presence. Another victim appeared in its field of vision, and it was going to finish him off. Then suddenly X noticed that he thought she was using magic and thought that he didn't know what kind of magic it was, so he had to be careful with it. Thanks to the armor, he got a lot of vitality and resistance to magic. So it's best for him to deal with it quickly and get only minor damage. After all, no one knows how it can end if you waste time. Therefore, quickly heading towards the dark fox, X said that he must complete this quest quickly. X put up his shield to deflect the fox's attack, as he noticed that the fox was also heading in his direction. Looking at the fox, X smiled and thought that it was quite strong. But it was not strong enough to kill him. As he took the fox's blow with his shield, X thought that he would not give it a chance to fight back. He would definitely destroy it. So, with all his strength, X swung his powerful sword and wounded the fox. Its blood splashed in all directions. The fox screamed in pain, not expecting him to be able to wound it. After all, it had always been the victor in the past. But X didn't just wound the fox, he struck the winning blow. One that the fox will definitely not be able to survive. Now it will not be able to harm anyone else. Standing in the middle of the forest, X watched the fox, which was already lifeless and emitting gray, dark smoke. It looked quite strange and eerie. Then looking at it, he said that he had attacked the enemy 3 times before. He thought he would compare it to a field boss monster that was a guardian of an ancient kingdom. 2 information windows appeared saying that X had received red fox skin and fox meat. The tree said that, as it expected, he was very strong. Its eyes had never seen him. Suddenly, X noticed that from the direction the dark fox had come, another fiercely charged at him. It was definitely going to take revenge for the first one. But X quickly and ruthlessly killed it and got the fox's meat and fur back. Suddenly, another fox appeared on the other side and tried to bite X on the shoulder. But it could not because of his armor. After all, it was a relic of an ancient kingdom and could not be easily bitten through. But X finished with it as quickly as with the previous ones, and he thought that it was the 10th one, for which he also received meat and fur. So he had added quite a bit to his inventory during this time. Exhaling a breath and smiling, X said that it wasn't just 1 or 2 of them getting more. So maybe it wasn't even the end. So while standing in the middle of the forest, X noticed another dark fox. It was sneaking up on him from the dark thicket of the forest. This fox was bigger, it had bigger teeth and fangs, it had 3 small horns unlike the previous ones that had only 1 horn and 3 red crystals glowing above them. She had very strange and clouded eyes that reflected the silhouette of X. But it clearly had more power than the previous 10. An information window appeared, informing X that this fox had rabies. So he had to be even more careful with it. Getting ready for the fight, X said that this was unusual. But he would still be able to defeat it. The fox growled fiercely and was ready to kill X right there. Looking at the fox, X thought that it would be a tough fight. But he was not helpless at all. So he gripped his sword tighter and thought that if that was the case, then he must do it as quickly as possible and swung to deliver a crushing blow. Then he shouted with all his might, "Bear stance," and used his strongest skill. Because his opponent was strong, he had to use his best skills. The light around X lit up and illuminated the entire clearing. He was going to wipe out the evil spirits. So, using the skill, Bear Stance, X glowed with a bright glow and sparks began to fly around him. Throwing his sword over his shoulder, X thought that this was a monster using dark magic, and if it wasn't for the bear's posture, he would have been in trouble. So, the cult of dark magic is strong, though. They have a bad reputation in Fate. There are dark magicians who work openly, but there are many others underground. For this reason, they are portrayed in a negative light, like dark evil foxes with a horn on their foreheads. X then thought that an evil aura had started to spread in the ancient forest, or did this mean that dark magicians were behind it? An information window appeared, informing X that the quest, Save the Children of the Forest, was successfully completed. Then the tree said that he had done a good job and that the children were able to calm down. Then X thought, looking at the information window, that if that was the case, shouldn't the difficulty of this quest be A or B, not C+? Then X turned to the tree and said that now they just need to clear the evil aura near the center. Then the tree replied that that was right, if he could then it could trust him to do it without worry. So the tree asked him to take care of the evil aura that was trying to control them. There is a new quest called Purification. In the center of an ancient forest, there is a source of energy from ancient trees. Trying to control and capture the trees, the evil aura released demonic beasts to the energy source. Whoever wins the trust of the ancient trees can fight the source of the evil aura in the center of the region. The condition is to win the trust of the ancient trees. The reward is not derived from the trust of the ancient trees. Reading the quest conditions, X agreed and thought that the stated rewards were few, but there were additional rewards he could expect. A drop from destroying the source of the evil aura. Then X thought about the controlled monster and realized that it would not be easy for him. Then the tree said that it would guide him and show him the way to the center. The sky was already quite light and the sun was rising. The tree showed him the way to the center of the ancient forest. X set off along the road the tree showed him. When he reached a large cave in the tree, X thought he had finally reached his destination. Standing in front of the entrance to the large cave, X thought that it looked familiar, but he was sure that he was here for the first time, so why did he have such feelings? It's because this entrance to this cave looks exactly like the entrance to the dungeon in Tyler's house. X then smiled and said that this means that this dungeon is the source of the evil aura, the dungeon boss. He wasn't scared at all, and was even in a kind of slight anticipation. X was very excited to go down into the dungeon. Then X thought that he missed Thayer's house a little bit in the dungeon. The experience points were good, but all they gave for the addition was a piece of wood. X then thought that he wanted to dive into this dungeon right now, but this time the target was using dark magic. This fight would not be easy. Standing in front of the entrance, X thought that the mobs in the dungeon would be on a different level compared to the ones he had faced before. Then he thought that he should definitely use the bear posture there. But he needed to see how much time was left on the CD and discovered that there were only 13 hours left. So he took off his helmet and thought that he should wait for the bear pose CD. He has time, so he can check the statistics of the first stream. So he thought he would use this chance to get out of the game. So he approached the tree and said he would be back after a short break, so he asked them not to bring other people in the vicinity, and the tree said it agreed. Then X leaned over to the tree and asked that he was just asking if it had done such favors for anyone else besides him. The tree replied that no, it had not asked anyone else, it had only heard his voice. Probably there will be no others in the future. Then holding his sword, X said that everything was fine, so he thought he would just supplement his food before leaving. Leaving the game, X thought that the next time he came in he would go straight to the dungeon. After he left, an information window appeared with a time of 48 hours and the exit was complete. X woke up and thought that the dungeon was right in front of him. The source of Mega Guild's power is dungeons. The value of a dungeon is astronomical. Thinking about it, he opened the capsule and sat down. Then X realized that he was thinking about getting a chance to get a dungeon himself. He wanted to bow down to the eternal trees. So he stood up and stretched and said that he had to take a short break. So he got into bed and picked up his phone. Now he needs to check the stream stats and he needs to learn dark magic. Opening the Fate app from all the tabs, he chose streaming. But when he saw the open window on the screen, he was very surprised that it was actually what he was seeing. He got up from the bed and stared at the phone screen and shouted, "What?" The total number of views of his mukbang show was 5,328,000. The golden support he received was 10,500. At the time, he thought that 10k gold was 50 million he had won. But he didn't think that the amount of money he would receive for the support would be 50 million won. How many chickens does he have to fry to earn that kind of money? Then he remembered his broadcast, where he steamed a scorpion. It looked okay, but it tasted to die for. At the time, the commentators didn't believe him that he was actually eating it and said that he was pretending to eat it. But he explained to them that it was a very low level for him and he would show them how he chewed and swallowed the food. Then a commenter called Johnwoo's mom asked him to yell at Johnwoo. And he yelled at him and told him to listen to his mom and be healthy. So he thought that a lot of people were watching him do nothing. Meanwhile, at school, one student was yelling at the other to hurry up because they would miss their school bus if they didn't get out right now, and the other was busy watching something. Then the first student went over to the second and looked at his phone, asking what he was looking at that he couldn't even answer him. Then he looked at the screen and asked if it was a video of a mage streamer uploaded to NeoTube. Or is he watching War Machines? But on the screen of the phone was X's stream where he was fighting with a guard of an ancient kingdom. Then he asked who this guy was. He hadn't seen him before. Was he the runner? Looking at the screen, the first guy said that X was very cool. There were a lot of other comments on this stream like this Desert of Oblivion that X came out, that it's a man's game so he can feel at peace, and questions about the mukbang being over because they just brought food. Some guy in a coffee shop saw the number of views of X's show and was amazed and even jumped up from the table. He was amazed at 500k views. 500k people saw it. He caused inconvenience to other visitors of the cafe, some of them asked what it was. Some said it even made them jump, while others were scared. The guy started to apologize to the other patrons for that. But 2 more people came into the cafe and started talking about X. They didn't know who he was and said it was a trend from fate. The guy who made all the customers scared was very embarrassed. But the 2 who came into the cafe went on to say that they also wanted to interview him before he became famous. But they couldn't find him. They've asked everywhere about him and no one knows anything. So they have to hurry up and find him. The guy who scared the visitors said that the more he watches it, the more it gets weirder for him. X's stream was even shown on the big screen of Fate. People all over the city were watching his stream. So, meanwhile, at the X. An employee of the station was talking to someone on the phone. He said hello and said that this was the X broadcasting station and asked if they had seen X and if it was true. Another employee who was sitting at the desk asked the main man if he could repeat his game ID again, because he said he played with X. Then the main man shouted that it was not X, it was X. Then the host turned to a girl whose name was Yu Young and asked how was the progress of getting X, is everything ready? This is the newcomer of the radio station PD, say Yu Young. The girl then said that she was asking around but couldn't find a way to contact him. She kept calling different numbers, but they were all fake. Then the chief asked if she was just giving up. The girl said she wasn't, she meant she would look for a way to contact him. Then the director said that if she couldn't find him, she would have to try to get his attention in a streaming chat. He added that newcomers are so frustrating these days. The girl said she would do her best. Then Yu Jong fell on the table in despair. There isn't even one person who knows who X is, what do they want her to do? Then she looked at X and thought he looked very familiar to her. While at home, X was thinking that he probably didn't need to worry about not becoming a streamer. After resting, X reappears in the game at the entrance to the dungeon in the center of the ancient forest. After returning to the game, the boy summoned Youngjin. A purple portal appeared near X's foot and Yong Jiun flew out of it, then an information window informed him that he had summoned his animal. The dragon sat on the boy's shoulder and he asked him if he was okay, and it was clear from the dragon's appearance that he was fine. Standing in front of the entrance to the dungeon, X said that he had summoned Yonghyun and could start exploring the dungeon. So X headed straight into the dungeon and an information window announced that he had entered the dungeon of the ancient forest. After entering the dungeon of the ancient forest, X and Yunjiun found themselves in the basement of the 1F. It was a brick room with torches on the walls and a statue on a pedestal. Green slime was flowing down the walls, and the boy thought that just by looking at it, he could tell that the dungeon was contaminated. X picked up a glowing root from the floor. He told Young Jiun that with this root he could light up the room. Because of this, he didn't need a torch, which would only get in the way during the battle. On his way, X noticed a deer that was flying at him with full speed. When he noticed this deer, he thought that it looked quite normal, but demonic energy was definitely flowing through it. Its eyes were red and there was a red ball hovering between its antlers. Looking at this deer, X even thought that it was a rather creepy version of a normal deer. Suddenly, X noticed some red smoke coming out of the deer's antlers, which was definitely dark magic. The deer began to shoot it at the boy, and he covered himself with a shield from the attack. The deer's attacks caused a pitch-black dust to rise in the room and nothing could be seen. While waiting for the dust to clear, X said that this animal is so impatient. It also attacks without thinking. Realizing the fact that the deer is quite strong and attacks without thinking, X uses one of his strongest skills, Bear Stance. After using Bear Stance, X said that he should go as far as possible while the effect of the skill is activated. So X ran as fast as he could toward the deer to attack it. A blue glow seeped out from all sides, coming from X and spreading throughout the room. X swung his sword with all his might and directed the attack directly at the deer. The boy attacked accurately and quickly, hitting the enemy directly. The deer fell powerlessly to the floor, it was dead. Realizing that the fight with this deer was quite fast, X said that probably the bear's posture was too much. Suddenly, he noticed that there was not just one deer in the basement of the one floor, there were several. Then looking at all his rivals, he said that everything was as he expected. When he realized how many rivals he was facing, X said that it was quite wonderful because he would not have to run around looking for them. These deer were also using dark magic, their eyes were red and they had a red light coming from them, so the boy thought they must be the same as the previous one. After speeding up, X said that he already knew all their attack patterns, so he now had a tactic to win. He ran between all the deer to get in front of them. And he struck a strong blow in the direction of the dark deer. The reindeer were immediately pierced by a light. But they fell to the ground. Exhaling a breath, X looked at the deer lying still and said that he had to finish the first floor and move on. He also needed to keep an eye on his stamina during the attacks. After the battle, X received the meat of a spiritual deer. This is the meat of a deer that turns into a spirit through prolonged exposure to ancient trees. It contains a lot of magical energy. After reading this information, X realized that it was not dark magic, but a spiritual deer. If the users of the magic class found out about this, they would definitely go crazy. Wizards are a type of class in which intelligence directly corresponds to attack power. It's not just wearing equipment that requires intelligence. The sheer amount of intelligence is a manifestation of strength. Suddenly, X thought that if he continued to increase his intelligence like this, would he be like a magical swordsman who could use both magic and sword. Then he gathered himself and said that he would increase his intelligence anyway. After a while, X and Yanjian were already in the dungeon of the ancient forest in the basement of the 10th floor. Right now there was a fight with one of the deer in the basement. X was throwing blow after blow, because he was ready to win. So the boy gathered all the strength he had in his body and cut in half all the deer that were still capable of fighting with great speed. The deer's heads flew in different directions from X's sharp sword. Pieces of the deer's bodies were scattered. And everything around shone with a blue light. X stood in the middle of the basement and watched the dead deer, which were no longer moving. The room was shining with blue light and the boy was glowing as well. X smiled at young Jayun and said that there was no end to it and suggested that they rest. After ordering him to take off his helmet, X exhaled a sigh of relief. He was completely tired. The guy told Yun Jayun that he was thinking about doing mukbang in the dungeon, which would be quite interesting. So he said that next time he would try to stream in a dungeon. It would be something new and he had never seen anything like it before. Then, right in the middle of the basement, X decided to cook a divine meal. He grilled some deer meat. When X was about to eat, he noticed that Yun Jiang was also hungry. So he asked him to wait a bit longer. So X quickly divided a large piece of meat into two and offered the dragon a taste. After thanking him for the food, X and the dragon began to eat. Yongyan's face showed that he was enjoying the food very much. While tasting this meat, X thought that there was no game meat that was like this, even the texture of this meat was of a higher class. While X was eating the deer meat, an information box appeared, informing him that the heavenly taste had found the hidden flavor of grilled deer meat. Eating the deer meat increased his maximum mana by 500 points and his intelligence by 20 points. Thus, X's level increased to 124, his fame to 940. His mana was now 19,800 and his intelligence was 604. X then thought that he still had a long way to go to catch up with the lesser status of the undead in the death reversal. Although his intelligence would soon catch up with the wizards. By absorbing the energy of the spiritual deer, he would have an affinity with nature that would last for a maximum of 24 hours. He will be able to absorb mana from the environment during this time and the damage he deals will increase by 100% during these 24 hours. Reading this information, X couldn't figure out what buffs he would get. There was also a lot of time left because he had eaten all the meat. So he sat there and tried to figure out what skills he was given. He heard someone behind him asking for help. He grabbed his sword and jumped up to see who it was, but behind him was only a green sphere that said it was the spirit of an ancient forest. The spirit explained to the boy that his body and mind were in control, which is why it was so difficult for him to speak. X listened attentively. The spirit told X that at the energy source in the center of the ancient forest, the pollution of the rune stone was getting faster. If he continued on this path, he would not go any further, because the other ancient trees would be controlled by evil energy. When the spirit of the ancient forest spoke about the rune stone, X was very surprised. After all, there are dozens of rune stones spread across the Fate world. The ancient forest is just one of those places. The rune stones act as a pillar in the city to purify and prevent the collapse of the world of Fate. But the spirit of the ancient forest went on to say that if the rune stone is contaminated, the ancient forest will turn into a wasteland. A land that will never recover. That's why if the rune stone is polluted, the forest becomes like hell where nothing can survive. After listening to the spirit, the boy suggested that maybe it meant that someone was intentionally polluting the rune stone. The sphere agreed with the boy's assumption, because there was no other way to contaminate the rune stone. Then the spirit asked the boy to hurry up and wanted to say something, but he didn't have time. With a great roar, the stone simply broke into tiny pieces. The boy was surprised, because this situation was incredibly strange. Why would the spirit of the ancient forest just split into pieces like that? X was amazed and said he wasn't sure, but he thought there must be a bad character doing it. Suddenly, a big shadow fell over him. He turned around and saw a huge bear, which must have had dark magic too, because its eyes were red. X grabbed his sword and said that he would first take care of this bear, and then he would go to the place where the rune stone was located. At that moment, an information window appeared and informed him that he only had 15 minutes left to defeat the bear. After dealing with the bear, X finally reached the basement 35F of the central ancient forest. The last barrier that separated him from what was inside was a huge stone gate, centered on a huge stone head. Grasping the handles of the gate, he said with determination in his voice that he would finally make it. In the next instant, he opened the gate, which gave him a passage to a bridge. This bridge led to the center of the hall, where in front of some circle above which some red stone hovered in the air, shining with red light. This stone was none other than a rune stone, which the protagonist immediately recognized. However, at the moment he was more concerned about the guy sitting in front of the stone, who could be said to be bad even at first glance. Realizing that a fight could not be avoided, and that the opponent might be very strong, X told Yong to hide and rest for now. In the next moment, the stranger who was sitting in front of the runestone turned around sharply, finally revealing his face, which had a crazy smile on it. However, our hero was already standing in a fighting stance, already fully prepared for battle. Flashing lightning, he rushed towards his opponent at a great speed, deciding that since he was also a humanoid and had the same weaknesses, it would be the right decision to attack the vital places. The hooded stranger was stunned, as he didn't expect such a quick attack that was aimed directly at his weaknesses. Even so, at the very last moment, he jumped high into the air and managed to dodge the deadly attack. X was a bit surprised that he managed to dodge, as the sword blade passed just a few centimeters from his neck. However, even so, it still wasn't the end. In the next instant, with a shout that he would not be able to dodge, he struck another blow that was much stronger than the previous one, and which, as expected, pierced the body of the villain. From this he cried out painfully and began to cough up blood. But in the next moment he was able to regain his senses, and bounce away. His eyes were still full of hatred, determination, and anger, which could only mean that this was not the end of it. However, that was to X's advantage, as it would obviously take him longer to catch the villain than to finish him off on the spot. Suddenly, he smiled gloatingly and began to say something in a language incomprehensible to the protagonist, as if reading some spell. This left X perplexed, as he couldn't understand what he was saying or what he was planning to do. The next moment, a red sphere glowing with red lightning was formed in the hands of the hooded guy who kept muttering something. After he finished creating it, he took it in one hand. After that, he rushed straight to the protagonist, who was looking at it in bewilderment. A moment later, a Rasengan-like orb appeared before his eyes, threatening to destroy his head at any moment. Although he was caught off guard by the fact that it was a melee technique and not a long-range one as he had thought, he still managed to dodge it. The fact that he was fighting him in close combat was only to X's advantage, because that was his specialty, and he was armed with nothing but a sword. The next moment on the face of the bad guy reflected horror, from the understanding of what will happen to him now. For when he saw our hero come to his senses and swing his sword at him, he realized everything. The next moment X struck a blow that easily split the villain's body in two. However, even before his death, he did not give up hope of taking the protagonist with him to hell, and continued to mutter incomprehensible words. From which a notice appeared in front of X that he had been given the stigma of annihilation. Perhaps someone else in his place would already be dead, but not him, because immediately after that, there was a second system notification, which reported that because of his title, the stigma was cancelled. After the villain's death, there was silence, and only the lightning bolts crackled quietly as they disappeared. The next moment, a system notification said that he had successfully cleansed the polluted center of the ancient forest, and then he was also flooded with notifications that he had raised his level. Seeing that his level had risen by as much as 5 levels, X noted that his opponent must have been very strong. However, it didn't matter anymore, as the crystal had regained control and was able to clear itself. As soon as this happened, the protagonist received a notification that the mission had been completed. Since the mission was completed, it was time to collect the loot from the defeated enemy. The first bonus reward was a worshipper's ring, which according to the description was tainted with an evil aura, but its effect was sealed, and to use it you had to be level 300. The second reward, however, was a quest called the Diary of the Keeper of the Ancients. The diary was written in an ancient language, and it could have information about the fall of the ancient kingdom. The quest was to begin as soon as the user unlocked the special effect of the ring. Looking at the ring in his hand, X wondered if the bad man, the ring, and the quest were somehow connected. And if the cult he belonged to was trying to destroy the entirety of fate after destroying the ancient kingdom. Although he had been trying to get the rewards from the celestial gourmet from the beginning, he wasn't sure if it would be that easy, because it was getting more and more complicated. Besides, even his title that could cancel a strong death spell was probably not for nothing, and he felt as if he was being guided by someone. And if his hunch was correct, it was likely that he could get involved in a quest with a huge and complicated plot. Deciding to leave thinking about it for later, he decided to go and get the main reward first, which Yong was fine with. After a while, they went back to the forest, where night was reigning at that moment. Coming to a talking ancient tree, the protagonist reported that he had destroyed the source of the evil energy, and also reported that the runestone should be fine for a while longer. Hearing this, the tree was overjoyed. After thanking X, he said that he would never forget what he had done for him. Immediately after his words, a system notification appeared in front of the protagonist that he had completed the quest, as well as an indication that he had to head south for the next task. He was about to go, but the talking tree called out to him, asking how a gourmet like him could go without food. To which he replied that he would not be able to deal with the guardians of the ancient forest even if he ate well. Hearing his answer, the ancient tree laughed, and calling him stupid, wished X a good acquaintance with his friend. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head, he smilingly replied that in that case he would move out right away. However, the talking tree stopped him again, telling him to wait. Suddenly, its roots began to shake, as did the ground around it. Feeling this, the protagonist stared at the ground in shock, wondering if it could have been an earthquake. However, after a moment he realized that it wasn't, because the culprit was standing right in front of him. In front of him stood a huge tree golem, which was Mr. Talking Tree. Watching the shocked expressions on the faces of the dragon and our hero, the ancient tree said that it wanted to show him its true power before he would leave. Saying that they remember grudges for a long time, but never forget gratitude, he added that he should never hesitate to ask him for help. He then held out his woody hand to the protagonist, which he looked at in surprise. After shaking his hand in return, X thanked him, saying that he would definitely call on him for help. As soon as they shook hands, a system notification informed him that he should head south, for his next mission. Waving goodbye to the ancient tree, our hero set off on his journey. Turning to Yong flying beside him, he told him that their next destination would be the rainforest, which was in the south. After asking Yong Yong if he was looking forward to seeing what the rainforest would be like, he enthusiastically replied that he was. Leaving the ancient forest, they began their new journey, full of exciting adventures, which maybe we will be able to learn about someday.